Hello, everyone. I'm going to wait a couple of seconds. I know there's a delay. If everyone can hear me, can you please type a thumbs up in the comments? Okay, what's going on? Yes? Okay, great. Oh, that's hilarious. I'm looking at the wrong. Awesome. Okay, so let's get started on this because I know a lot of people have been waiting. Hey, Lee, I see you in the comments. What's up? I know a lot of people are ready to get started with this, and I am. So welcome to American Shade. It's Brittany King, your host and your girl, and it's been a while since I've done a panel discussion, but I'm so excited to do this one. I have some dope guests, and let's just get started with this. But first, if you have not subscribed, I don't know why, subscribe to this channel. Also hit the like button because it doesn't cost anything. It's free. And also it will help the algorithm get attention of other people to see this conversation. So I have pulled together an awesome panel to discuss Dave Chappelle and his latest special, The Closer. Not only that, but this controversy hosts a lot of polarizing issues in the cultural conversation right now, like censorship, like transphobia, cancel culture, freedom of speech, and even the purpose of comedy. Like, what's the purpose of it? Should there be restrictions? Should it be limitless? Like, we're going to talk about all those things. But before I do, I want to preface with this that with this channel, I always aim to have these panel discussions as balanced as I possibly can and have as many perspectives represented as possible. And on this platform, you're going to see people that are going to disagree. You're going to see people that are in favor of Dave or not, or a mixture of both. But I did reach out to activists and some friends that are part of the LGBTQIA community, specifically the trans community, but due to work conflicts and just simply due to time, this is why they aren't present on the panel tonight. But there was a huge effort on both sides to have this point of view represented because I do think it's important for this discussion and for the whole discussion. So I want to say that. Without further ado, let's bring up the panelists. So we have actually, I'm going to have them introduce themselves. I'm just going to bring everyone up. Let's just do that. Good, everyone, good? And there's one person we're still waiting for, Dr. Lindsey Lunsford, and she teaches, so she'll come in later, so no problem. But right now, I'm going to have each panelist, can you say your name, what you do, and can you briefly share why you wanted to be a part of this discussion tonight? And anyone can start.
Hi, my name is Roberge. I am a stand-up comedian. I was asked by Brittany to be a part of this discussion. I'm honored because I'm a big fan of Brittany's work, and she asked me to talk about the Chappelle special.
What's up? Can y'all hear me? Everybody hear me?
Yeah.
I bet. Just making sure. I'm backstage right now. I'm at the Lion King. I'm a swing, so I have to be in earshot in case somebody rolls their ankle or something like that. So if magically I disappear, that means I'm on stage. So
okay.
Otherwise,
that's a good reason.
That means something catastrophic happened in the Lion King in Cleveland, and I'm on stage. I am proud to be here. My name is Kyle Robert Carter. I'm from Northern Virginia. I'm an actor, singer, writer, jack of all trades type artist. I'm currently teaching myself how to do shoe customization. I'm just one of those dudes that always has a paintbrush or a pen in my hand. And I am a massive Dave Chappelle fan. I remember being in middle school when the Clayton Bigsby Black White Supremacist episode of the Chappelle Show came out. I had already seen Half Baked at that point in time. My parents didn't know that, but that's how bad I love this dude. And Blue Streak anyway. Anyone who's a fan will know those things. And I am connected here through a mutual friend named Will Roosh, who is a fellow, an educator that I met along the way as being an artist. And I really respect what he does because he's a very open-minded thinker and we disagree on a lot of things, and we're able to have conversations about disagreements we have in an intellectual way and also an empathetic way. And so anyone he says I'm down to connect you with and be on a panel or something like that, I'm there, because that's all I'm about.
Awesome.
Nice. I'll pick up off of that. My name is Jeremy. I am an accountant for a recruiting software company, and I'm also a student as well. And like Kyle, I'm actually from Virginia as well. I'm not in Virginia right now, so but maybe we can link up one day. But yeah, 2 up, 2 down. So I'm from Williamsburg, Virginia. So that's like the south side of Virginia. But why I wanted to be a part of this discussion, I think really just because there are a lot of like ideas within culture and within society that we're really coming to a reckoning with when it comes to things like freedom of speech and cancel culture and now, you know, things like comedy and what you can and cannot say when it comes to comedy. So I just thought this would be a great opportunity to share some of those ideas. I know that this is a tense time for a lot of people, for all of us, honestly. And everybody has their opinions. We butt heads a lot, but I'm hoping that with this discussion, we'll all just, you know, share our ideas, you know, amicably. So that's really why I'm here.
And then we'll go with Aaron and then Dr. Lindsey Lunsford.
That's pretty funny that you managed to unintentionally pull 3 Virginians for a panel of 5 people.
I did that on purpose, actually.
Yeah, no, I'm from outside of Richmond, and I think we could have a whole separate conversation just about all that. No, my name is Aaron. I, by day, am getting a PhD in moral education, and I'm interested in moral philosophy and a lot of issues that connects to. And I'm excited to be here. I think probably Brittany got my name as someone who was critical of the special, and I think I want to be here presenting that one can be very much a fan of Dave Chappelle. I recognize that he is one of the greatest to ever pick up the microphone, and at the same time say, like, this was a misstep as a set, and like we can have a conversation about why it was, I think in my opinion, an objectively transphobic and problematic set, without having to then say that like he should be canceled or this should be removed or something like that. I think like lots of people within the LGBT community have made exactly those sorts of claims. So I'm hopefully going to try to represent that. I'm also here to represent Team Space Jews, obviously. They deserve a voice in all of this.
Do I just hop right in?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. That's why you can't hear me. Go ahead. Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, so hello everyone. I'm excited to be here. Brittany asked me to come on and share my thoughts and opinions about the podcast. I'm sorry, about the Netflix special. I was able to see and view the special, and I found the critiques to be really enlightening when it came to the subject of anti-Blackness. And anytime I can get a chance to speak or educate around the subject of anti-Blackness, I'm usually really open and happy to. So I come here waving that flag or that banner, looking at the ways that it was a form of media to educate around the subject of anti-Blackness. So I'm going to end it there.
And just a preface, I've known Lindsey since like what, 7th grade.
Yeah, I didn't know how much you wanted to like.
No, I'm just gonna say it because I have to say it now. She's Dr. Lindsey, so my bad, Dr. Lindsey. But anyway, so I'm just gonna do some background work to get people up to speed. So Netflix recently premiered Dave Chappelle's latest special, The Closer, last week. In this special, he talks basically about everyone, but more specifically the LGBTQIA community. And since then, many people have called for his special to be pulled from Netflix, including the showrunner for Dear White People, Jacqueline Moore, who stated, "I will not work with Netflix as long as they continue to put out and profit from blatant and dangerous transphobic content." And Miss Moore is also a trans woman. There's been a plethora of people and activists who echo her sentiment, calling for Dave Chappelle's cancellation and saying he's irresponsible and harmful. But on the flip side, Dave has received an outpouring of support from fans and fellow comedians who have stated his comedy is misunderstood and he does not, quote, punch at people, but he punches at lines. So I want to Also to add, Netflix has expressed they will not be removing the closer or any of his content from the platform. So I just want to get down to brass tacks and get everyone's general take of the closer. And then also, if you haven't already, tell us a little bit about your relationship with Dave's comedy. Are you someone that's been watching for a while, just started off and on, like just that kind of background? So I'll start with Kyle.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a huge, not just follower of Dave Chappelle, but the two kind of most pop culture influences on the kind of art that I create when I'm creating like music is Dave Chappelle and Dave Grohl. So Dave Grohl being the head of the Foo Fighters. I think both of them do a phenomenal job of being extremely deliberate with what words they choose to use and the way in which they are very patient about taking their time making a point, as opposed to, you know, some songwriters, right? They just get straight to what the song is about. I don't know what is and is not a couth to say, but you know, Ludacris makes it pretty simple. It's about going to the club, girls, drinking, you know, things of that nature in terms of the songs that he's famous for. And certain comedians are one-liner comedians. You know, Neil Brennan, who was Dave Chappelle's writing partner on Chappelle, in his Three Mics stand-up, he kind of goes through that. He can do one-liners, he can do anecdotal comedy. So anyway, all that to say is one of the things that I watched that really gave me an even deeper connection with what and how Dave Chappelle creates things was his whatever it was, hour and a half long Kennedy Center Honors event. And you got to hear people like Jon Stewart come up and speak about him, Neil Brennan, Talib Kweli was there, what's his face? I think Mos Def was there as well. But anyway, you got an opportunity to hear people really express how seasoned Dave was as a speaker from being a teenager rolling into comedy clubs in New York City. And so then in the special, or in the Kennedy Center Honors, Dave talks about his relationship as a child, learning what the word griot is, right? This kind of oral historian. And he talks about how important it was in the type of culture, right? Because Black is not a monolith. In the type of Black American culture that he was, how important the idea of a griot was. And when you look over the course of his entire career as a griot, I have noticed that he has essentially always an enemy. And that enemy generally is the white colonial overlord in general. So if you go all the way back to the very first episode of the Chappelle Show, right? The Black white supremacists kind of grappling with the duality of Black and white. And I think his kind of experiences, you know, growing up Northern Virginia area, DC area, Maryland area, and now he lives in Ohio in a small hippie town, as he calls it, right? I don't think that's a coincidence that he began his life in one way and he has chosen to go to this other side. And I am biracial as well, so I'm always looking at things. I'm half Black and half white, so my lens is always looking at things on half Black and half white. So getting to this particular special and my thoughts on it, I think I kind of lean more with where Aaron was speaking, which is, I think as a storyteller and what that story was in the trilogy, right? Equa, whatever, the Sticks and Stones and The Closer. I think as a trilogy, he did a great job of storytelling and making the point that he wanted to make. But I think the inherent issue was, I have a feeling he is not quite understanding the depth of intersectionality that's occurring. And I don't think he's really understanding how, if you think that artists in general are able to grab ideas, but no matter what, an idea comes from your own brain. I think it's fascinating that the opposite argument against Dave's argument could potentially be that Dave Chappelle is now Clayton Bigsby. that the character that he created in the very first episode of Chappelle, the blind black white supremacist, is actually the argument that a certain group of detractors would be able to say, you are now a blind black guy who is, depending on the lens that you view it in, defending not only an art form that, even when you look at Amy Schumer and Rachel Feinstein and Nikki Glaser, they talk about the boys club of that, and who are those boys and what is that language, who created that language, right? That boys club leans white in terms of how that came to be. And not only that, but when you make jokes about how you would never find yourself back at Walmart again, right? When you make jokes that allow you to be perceived as elitist, right? Yeah, you got $50 million back from Comedy Central, and you made Netflix, or you made Netflix pay you. But again, whose money is that? Where did that money come from? And why were you so happy and joyful to accept that money, move to a ranch called Fuck You Hollywood Ranch in a white town in Ohio, to then come to a stage and start saying, you know, again, within the context, slandering a group of people who are actually asking you to fight the same white overlord, or like the kind of colonial overlord that they want to. And so then it becomes the difference in the language of, I think Dave is not truly getting that it isn't that, I want to say,
it's complicated.
It's complicated. It's not. I think he really believes that they are saying to him, "You are punching down on us, and you are making fun of trans people. You don't give a shit about trans people." And I think it's deeper than that. It's more.
Let's get someone. Yeah, let's get someone else in here with maybe has an opposing viewpoint to that. Jeremy, do you want to tell us just briefly, maybe a minute or so, your thoughts on the closer and just background on how much of a fan you are of him or not?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Dave was, from all the way from back to the Chappelle show. I mean, he's a probably integral part of my childhood, and I think a lot of our childhoods, honestly. And honestly, it wasn't until I reached my 20s that I was sort of reintroduced to Dave again by one of my white friends. Shout out to Kenny. And yeah, I think today from his last few specials, I'm a big fan of Dave, and I think Dave is brilliant. I would go so far as to say I think that he's one of the best storytellers in comedy, period. I don't know if there's anybody that's better at narrating a story than that guy, and he really knows how to pull you and bring you in. He's extremely thoughtful. And I think that's why when I watched this special, because I have such a high regard for him, I was a little bit disappointed and ambivalent about the special, because I found myself laughing throughout it. So I think it's funny, a lot of the content I actually did think was funny, but after I finished it, I guess looking back on it, I was like, oh man, he made some comments that make me uncomfortable. And is that necessarily a bad thing? Not necessarily, but I do think that there are a lot of sloppy elements in this special that I think that we'll probably get into a little bit today. But knowing that the subject of this conversation is whether or not there should be limits on comedy, I think the stance that I'm sort of taking is that there should be limits in the sense of ethical limits that comedians place on themselves, not necessarily limits in terms of legal limits or this person or the special should be canceled or anything like that. But I do think they have a responsibility, especially comedians as well respected as Dave, to actually say something important and make sure he's getting the facts right. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Let's go to Abby, because Abby actually has met Dave, which is awesome. So I would love to hear more of that. And you said you saw him 200 times. I've seen him once.
Yeah. So my name's Abby. I'm a stand-up comedian. I've been doing comedy for about 10 years now. I grew up watching the Chappelle show. I was a door guy at the Comedy Store for 7 years, where he shot his special in the Belly Room. I've probably seen him live over 100 times, maybe 200 times. I don't even know. And often the sets range from 1 to 4 to 5 hour sets, where he shows up and gets on stage and drinks and smokes and just talks all night. And it's just kind of like a jazz session of comedy. It's really cool to see. I mean, I after a while, I mean, after enough times, you know, I never stayed in the room for the entire time because it's like a 4-hour set and I'm working and tired. But yeah, huge fan of him. I thought Sticks and Stones was great. I like this panel because, you know, it's I'm interested to hear the perspective of why it's bad. But like he says, like he opens the special by saying, like, it's a comedian's job to speak recklessly. You know, the comedian's job is to find where that line is, and it's to push, you know, the provoking thought and the provoking idea, and to, you know, most importantly, be funny too, right? I thought my understanding is he, you know, I only saw it once, and so, you know, when you're discussing a topic like that, or for me to discuss a topic like that, you know, I need to be, you know, a little bit more knowledgeable. But from my one viewing of the special, I watched it, I laughed throughout it. I thought it was funny. When it came to the trans issue, my understanding is that his critique with you know, the LGBT community and all that is it's led by, you know, there's an element of white privilege to it. The idea that you can't joke about it, which means if you can't joke about it, there is a level of power they have. And then the idea of punching down, if you're punching down, that means you're above them, you know, like someone's below you and someone's above you. So he's like, how can I be punching down? Because I don't view you as below me. I view you as equal. And then the other thing that he discusses is false empathy. You know what I mean? Where there's a lot of performative empathy in our society of people who think they're empathetic for, you know, for canceling people or tweeting or stuff. But he's like, I'm actually the one that is taking care of, you know, this person's, and I know it's not the strongest argument of like, I have a trans friend so I can say these jokes, because, you know, we've all heard, so like someone who's actually a racist be like, I got a black friend so I can say these jokes, you know what I mean? And so that's not the strongest argument, but the fact that he's talking about just living in an empathetic society where it's like, where there isn't strict rules, it's just, you know, are you a good person, are you not? And, you know, he took care of this person's daughter. So I thought that was great.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to Lindsay and then Aaron. I think you're on mute, Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks. I enjoyed the special. I enjoyed Dave Chappelle. Like Jeremy said, he's someone that I've grown up with. And then as I grew into my own consciousness and awareness, was able to be reintroduced to him. Because I know in my childhood, like, there were like, you know, I grew up with all those like Dave Chappelle rumors, like the crowd of like falsities that the media kind of perpetuated around him. Like he was somewhere in Africa or like doing crazy stuff, like, which, you know, as a child, I believed all that urban lore, and then grew up as an adult and was like able to be reintroduced to him with my own mind and sensibility, and was like, oh wow, like he's really funny and he's so intelligent. Because I know some of his like acting roles, he's like more like Blue Streak. It's like the hand thing. Like he's more like comedic and funny, and more like character acting. Like, so like to actually like come to him as an adult and like hear his takes on society were really refreshing. And like this stand-up like surprised me the most. Like I didn't know he was just so intelligent. I knew he was like, of course I knew he was like very, very intelligent, but like I really have a thing for like gifted, beautiful minds, and like to like hear his takes and the way he was able to weave and tell stories. And like, I'm like, what? Like, oh my God, I didn't even get that. And then knowing that he was like doing it at the power structure, the white elite, like not even just white elite, but like, you know, the dominant white power structure on a global scale. Like he wasn't just hitting the boys down here at home, but like on a global, like I knew that, you know, anytime you like have the nerve to like take like, you know, to tilt your lance at the system, that you will be punished. And so I kind of figured some backlash would come, but this one was surprising to me because I didn't really understand like his level of depth and genius, nor his commitment to Black people and Black culture. Like when he ended it and was like, I did this for my people, like I haven't felt that level of like cultural activism since like people I've studied, like Dick Gregory, who was like one of my greatest inspirations, and people like Fire, who were able to not only be activists but also were able to use their comedy as activism. So for me, I think I'm a fan of anyone that speaks truth to power when it comes to the state of anti-Blackness that the world is in. And Dave Chappelle is one of the people that does that. So that I think makes me a fan of him, even more so than just like his ability to tell jokes. It's his ability to speak on anti-Blackness when so many people are afraid to do so or just unwilling to do so.
Can I hear more of your can I hear your interpretation of like his anti-Blackness and like what you thought about that when it came to how he was comparing the Black community and the trans community and stuff? Like, I'd love to hear, you know, your.
Can we get Aaron's take first, and then we can definitely do that because that's interesting. But let's get Aaron, and then we'll have Lindsey answer Abby's question.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm interested to hear a lot more about that as well, because I'm sympathetic to Dr. Lindsey's comments about sort of what I see as like his implicit arguments about Black social death, which I think are in line with a lot of interesting post-colonial stuff, like what Kyle was talking about. And I think those are parts that are worth talking about. And I personally think there are lots of parts of this special that are meaty content and worth discussing. I think it would be unreasonable at some point for someone to say that like Dave Chappelle is not a good comedian, right? Like everybody here can point to a brilliant piece of work he's done. I would personally recommend that people Google his stand-up bit about mushrooms as one of the funniest bits about drug use I've probably ever seen. And like even in the Sticks and Stones special, the bit about like the LGBTQ car was funny. Like I thought he did a good job in that particular bit. What I think is important to note is that when we all recognize that he's one of the greatest of all time, that makes it worse in a sense that like this particular special, I think, was a miss in ways that I think he should understand. That like it's unreasonable to me, I think, that he wouldn't understand what punching down is, or like, especially because he uses it correctly himself in the conclusion of his own position. So like, I think we can talk about both subjective and objective complaints about this show, in the sense that like we can subjectively argue about whether the closer was funny. I didn't think it was his best work, and I can point to reasons why. I don't think it's as important as like whether or not objectively was this like a transphobic piece of work that like failed to do what it was setting out to do. And there I think like the case is fairly straightforward, in the sense that like this is, not all comedy is about making an argument. Some of it is. This special was about making an argument. Dave Chappelle was aiming to reach a conclusion, which is stop punching down on me and mine, right? And in order to get there, I think he made various argumentative mistakes along the way. Kyle pointed one out, I think, in the sense that like he has always been about targeting whiteness, and like that is a valuable thing to target. In this special, he repeatedly conflates whiteness and LGBTQ when it is advantageous to his argument to do so. And that is problematic, and I think is one of the major weaknesses here. I think he also, I think the anti-Black social death stuff is really valuable, but at the end of the day, he's making an argument that we need to be more empathic. But the first 50 minutes of this special doesn't convey that at all. Like, it doesn't suggest that he's doing the empathy work that I feel like he's asking other people to be doing, and that I think he's very capable of. And so, my hope is that like through these discussions, that continued empathy we can reach that. But I think it's also important to note that like he referenced in the show the way he walked away from Chappelle's show, and we all think that was, I think, a very impressive thing to do. Now, my understanding at the time was he did that because he was afraid of being co-opted by white people like myself. I would argue that this special is being co-opted by white people, as Kyle says, in much a similar way, that like the cancel culture narrative is in many ways a part of the anti-Blackness that he is arguing against, but that he's getting sucked into it, partly because I think he's tired of being harassed by woke people. And like people need to stop harassing Dave Chappelle because he clearly doesn't like it, and he makes whole specials about it. But like I think it's blinding him to what he's missing about the LGBTQ issues.
Lindsey, do you want to answer the question that Abby posed to you?
Can you restate the question, please?
It wasn't so much a question. I was just curious as to like more in like what you actually. Well, the question is, what do you think about Dave Chappelle's point of view when it comes to like how there's elements of, I guess, how the trans white thing relates to Black culture. I phrased that terribly.
No, I'm just trying to understand the question so I can answer it better.
Right. Like how he was talking about how, you know, if he makes fun of trans people, then he's punching down, but he views himself as the same. Like,
yeah, I think the punching down argument is kind of interesting. My comment specifically about the anti-Blackness was, I think throughout the entire special, he like highlights anti-Blackness in various different movements, from like the women's movement to
suffrage, because he brought Sojourner Truth in.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great example. So that's playing with the women's movement. So I think he says that, like Aaron stated, his whole critique, like, I'm not against trans people, I'm not against women, I'm against white people and this concept of whiteness. And so like whiteness can't exist without the concept of Blackness. And it's easier to talk about whiteness and white supremacy than it is to acknowledge anti-Blackness. So the idea, so basically but usually that's like the Voldemort, the thing that's never spoken on. And that's an analogy that I use from Harry Potter. Basically with Harry Potter, no one ever wants to say Voldemort's name because they think that it'll like make him come back and make him real. And that's what anti-Blackness is. Like, people don't want to say it. Same with white supremacy. People don't want to say it and they're afraid of it as if it's not already existent. So what he did to me was highlight things that are very anti-Black, that are very played out, and then that people don't always put a light on and speak on. So that was my thing. And so when I say that I'm a fan of anyone that can openly and blatantly speak about anti-Blackness and the way it shows up from like education, policy, food, healthcare, yeah, I'm a fan of that.
Do you think that is why he brought in the DaBaby example? Because right when you're talking about that, he talked about, DaBaby the rapper, people don't know. I don't know if he's famous for this, but people know that he often brags about murdering. He murdered someone at Walmart, got away with it, et cetera, et cetera. And he recently said some comments at a concert that was considered transphobic or homophobic to some. And there's been people that have wanted his music canceled and he's got critiques. So Dave Chappelle said, people don't say anything that he murdered someone. People don't say anything that he took a life. But right when he hurt someone's feelings, people are up in arms about that. So do you think he was talking more about anti-Blackness there because the person he murdered was Black and that people are just kind of desensitized to Black people dying maybe? Or was he talking about the fact that, and I don't know who mentioned it, but the fact that maybe the transgender community has a sense of power that you can't touch them because you can't hurt their feelings, and if you do, you'll get canceled. But this guy talked about murdering people. Sorry, did someone say they wanted to? Go ahead, anyone. I just thought about that because I didn't think about it in that way until Lindsey brought in that.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to that a little bit because, for one, I think one of the issues that I had with the special, and one of the reasons I called it a little bit sloppy, is that like the sorts of examples that he used to make the points that he made, I felt weren't good examples to use, even if I agree with the larger point, right? So like in the case of DaBaby, like I don't even think, I mean, if I recall correctly, I don't even think when he killed somebody, it was in self-defense, right? It wasn't like he just randomly killed somebody in Walmart and then,
that's what I thought.
Yeah, that's at least what I heard. Obviously I can't, I wasn't there and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, things like that. I think that another one of the larger issues I have with it is that while he made great points about the comparison between the two movements when it comes to the Black movement and the transgender movement, to me, it sounded more like he was pitting two underprivileged groups against each other almost in some ways. And it's like he was talking about the trans community as if it's like some conspiratorial white phenomenon that's used to like further oppress Black people. And you can see that the way that he ended the special when he talks to the trans community and says to stop punching down on my people. And you hear the examples that he used. He talks about like Kevin Hart not being allowed to host the Oscars. And then he talks about the baby situation, getting booted off a bunch of shows, as if those things really had anything to do with those men being Black, right? And not what they actually said, the hurtful comments that they actually said. Not to say that I think that what happened to them should have happened to them, but my point is that the examples that he's using, they seem to be pitting two communities against each other, and I really didn't like that. So,
I think Jeremy's definitely right that this is, to me, like the major concern is not the anti-Blackness stuff, which is, you know, like good in the special. It's that anti-Blackness discussion is sort of prosecuted by this comparison between the progress made by the LGBTQ community versus the progress made by the Black community. But in making that kind of argument, he is effectively erasing, you know, LGBTQ people of color who've been involved in these movements from the beginning. And it's clear that like he knows that they exist because he makes jokes about them in the special. It's just, my major concern is a lot of the people who I think are cheering Dave Chappelle right now because they are pro free speech and pro transgressive comedy aren't hearing the anti-Black stuff and the like discussion of the social death of the Black community. Much more they're hearing the anti-trans and that the LGBTQ are out of control and that sort of side of the argument. And so I'm worried that the stuff that is valuable is not getting through because of the stuff that is there that is centering the controversy.
Yeah, but that's not.
I've heard you say, sorry, I'll speak, and then Abby, if you wanted to go after. I've heard you say the social death, the social death of Black people. Do you mind demystifying that concept for people that aren't familiar with that language?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. So this is Orlando Patterson talking about trying to understand that what you were describing earlier about like whiteness needing sort of something to be contrasted with, and that being Blackness and Blackness being associated with being a group that is separated from the moral community and so are acceptable as targets of mistreatment, of exploitation, of such like that. And so, you know, the idea that Black people persist in this kind of social death is one of the attempts to try to explain why there has been lack of progress on various fronts, despite movements towards colorblind legislation and things like that.
So my disagreement with you, Aaron, is that you were talking about how a lot of the people watching the special are only hearing the trans jokes and not even fully understanding or appreciating the sentiment when he's talking about you know, the Black issues and things like that. But it's like that's not up to us who fully gets and grasps the jokes. You know what I mean? It's like you can't hold the artist accountable because not everybody that watches the special appreciates it on that deeper level.
I mean, I would argue that Dave Chappelle has made his name partly by holding people accountable for not appreciating his art in the right kind of ways when he walked away from Chappelle's show because it was being co-opted by white racists. So I think he should be genuinely still concerned if his material is being co-opted by people who I think are in many cases white racists. Obviously, that doesn't mean everybody in the world who watches this is not getting that part of the content. And also, I will argue that like the piece is transphobic separate from whether or not you catch the anti-Blackness stuff. And that's the major problem. And like it's anti, you know, LGBTQ people more broadly, not just transphobic. But I also think it's worth noting that it fails in some levels to achieve the things that it's trying to achieve that are good, like addressing the persistent inequality between, you know, Black people and white people.
I wanted to say one thing about the baby joke. That I think part of the reason why the DaBaby joke doesn't land the way, or the DaBaby, I shouldn't even say the DaBaby joke, the DaBaby content doesn't land the way I think maybe he planned it to land, or how we received it, is I believe it was equanimity. I could be wrong. It might have been Sticks and Stones, but I believe it was equanimity, where at the very beginning of the show, he says, I'm going to give you a punchline. I'm going to tell you what the punchline is. And a half an hour from now, I'm going to say the punchline and you're going to laugh. I swear he wrote this show, like in maybe one day, one of us will get to meet him and we can ask him. I swear he wrote this show. The DaBaby thing happened. And then he had a thought in his head of don't abort the baby. And he was like, that's some funny shit. So how can I fit this punchline within the context of this thing that I wrote? And I think that's why the argument, because I agree that specifically that argument in there is the weakest argument of how, and even as such, I think I messaged Brittany about the John Gruden thing in the NFL recently. Even people referencing John Gruden, and I've had multiple friends text me, hey, did you see what happened in the NFL? That's exactly what Dave Chappelle was talking about. And I wanted to say, and for anyone who doesn't know what happened in the NFL, John Gruden, famous Super Bowl winning coach, who is partially famous for being a Super Bowl winning coach because he arguably took a black coach's players the very next year after the black coach was fired and took them to the Super Bowl and took all the credit for it, or we gave him all the credit for it. I should say probably more so media and popular culture gave him all the credit for it. This person is known, his nickname is Chucky, and he's known because he makes an angry face and it looks like a Chucky doll. So he took a decade off to be on ESPN, or to basically be a football commentator, and emails were recently leaked over his time being a commentator, messaging NFL executives extremely homophobic and transphobic type things, as well as things that were anti-black microaggressive comments. And what people were arguing was he didn't get fired immediately or resign immediately after basically saying that DeMaurice Smith, the former NFL the president of the NFL Players Union, was lying so much that he had big lips, and John Gruden called it away and threw that away and said, I say anyone who's lying has big rubber lips, which in and of itself, even if that is true, John, where do you think you got the idea that someone who's lying has big rubber lips? Where do you think that came from, buddy? Anyway, that's separate. That he only resigned after it came out of the more egregious emails about the homophobic rhetoric. But I think what I texted my friends back who were saying that is, I that is completely trivialized in the sense of that information came out very, very quickly. I wouldn't say back to back in the sense, it's probably like within 1 or 2 or 3 days of each other. And I have a feeling that was going to happen anyway, that essentially all of the emails ended up being released because the first email got released.
I have to interject, Kyle.
Go for it.
How is this tying into Dave Chappelle?
So Dave Chappelle makes the argument, right, that we didn't cancel DaBaby, right? We didn't cancel DaBaby when we knew that Black people died as a result of him, right? He doesn't, as Jeremy said, he doesn't reference or sorry, if it was Jeremy or Britt, I'm sorry, who said it. He didn't reference that it may have been self-defense, right? He referenced it more as a Black person died as a result of a gun being in DaBaby's hand. We did not cancel DaBaby for the death of a Black person. We canceled DaBaby because he got on stage, got a little brazy, and said some anti-gay things. And that it was because of the anti-gay rhetoric that he was canceled. And he went on to say, with the exact words, "It makes me jealous how well your movement is doing, because we will cancel a Black man, not for murdering a Black person, but for pissing off gay people." And I think Aaron made the point of specifically, it seems with the way that language is contextualized to be a faction of that is primarily white and woke. And so the John Gruden thing coming out, I think that's why people were trying to conflate the John Gruden thing to Dave Chappelle thing as evidence that this happened. But I don't think that was actually evidence.
We also have to remember this is a stand-up comedy special, so it's like if we're gonna have it if he's gonna go up there and just have an actual debate and compare the two movements and how they correlate and all that stuff, that's one thing. But he has to make his debate within the context of a joke, and so with the joke, you have to make concessions and bend the truth and find things and figure out where the punchline lies, and it's up to the audience to first laugh and then unpack it on a deeper level. But it has to be packaged to you in a joke, otherwise it's not good art.
Right.
I would just add, I'm sorry, Kyle, I didn't follow the Gruden story, so I wasn't able to follow you at all there. But I do have 3 points that I kind of had picked up from the conversation. I guess about the baby joke, why it landed so well with me is because, and this is something that I think is good about Dave, is that there's no heroes or villains. So he puts people in a category where he says, I'm telling you everything he said was fucked up. Are we allowed to cuss on here? Sorry, I hadn't checked the rules. I'm telling you everything. I'm telling you, like, so he says what he says is shit, but what I'm saying is you all are shit because of this. So, like Jeremy said, was it self-defense? I've heard many songs where the baby, like I have him in my mind where he's like, yeah, I killed a nigga in front of my daughter before the age of 3, right? And so it's like he's got this in many songs where he's like, not only did he murder someone, he's did it in front of his 3-year-old daughter. And he's like, and I'll do it again. You know, she knows, like she's hardened to this life. And no one was mad. Not only were people not mad, he got to have the name The Baby and be marketed as like a comical to younger age rappers. Like he's like a young folk, like, you know, this is someone my great uncle is listening to. This is someone that's being marketed to children, and people were fine with it. He was booked at Rolling Loud, right, where he made those comments. But yeah, he did in someone's life in Walmart casually, you know, like, and why he brings up Walmart, which I thought was so beautiful, is because he picks at everyone. So you're laughing at Dave Chappelle until he throws out like, nobody wants 30-year-old Punani or something. And you're like, damn, he got me. Like Dave Chappelle, like you're never safe with him. He's going to get everyone in the room. So the truth, right? And so I think the thing that with the baby is he's saying this man killed someone in Walmart, you know, and then made songs about it in front of his child.
Brags about it.
No one was mad about that. But he hurt some gay people's feelings, not in, like you just said, Kyle, a specific sect of people, because he did mention Stonewall and so many types of gay people that are left out of the traditional narrative of the LGBTQ IA conversation. So I think the line for me was like, I even thought that, like, dang, he has killed. There's someone that's no longer on this earth today because of this man, stand your ground or not. But people don't think like the baby murderer. They think the baby spoke wrong, you know. Or even my issue sometimes, like the violence with like Meg Thee Stallion and him bringing Tory Lanez out like at that exact moment. So whatever, I just say that. The second point, what you said, Jeremy, about whether Kevin Hart or the other gentleman, you know, whether they were right or wrong. Like he's not saying like, these are my friends, you made them mad. He calls them Cliffords, which I think is very exciting, which gets me to my last point, the things that people went over their head because it was too intellectual, too advanced, or too brilliant, or too much to argue against, that is not mentioned in this stand-up. The things that are brought up that people will leave alone and just raise this banner of, oh, he's transphobic, which I think is too easy a trope. Like he got in there on some space Jews comments that people are not ready to talk about. He got in there on them pussy hat bitches that people are not ready to talk about. There are some very Lindsey said that people aren't really ready to go there. So my last point is just the Clifford thing was talking about being a good Negro versus a bad Negro. And he was saying even the good Negroes are being called out too. And I think some people that are not with it in culture or steeped enough in Black culture specifically won't get this. And that's then the comment what Aaron brought up earlier. Who is Dave Chappelle speaking to? Is he speaking to these liberal audiences, or is he speaking to his audience and people that are steeped in his culture? Who did he do this stand-up for, and who is he speaking to, and who does he give a damn about opinion?
Yes. At the Mark Twain, when he received the prize for the Mark Twain Award, I mean, he said explicitly that I make fun of everyone, I get at everyone because I see myself in everyone. So his comedy is for everyone. But the thing is, what I'm saying is, in the conversations I've had with specifically my friends in the trans community, it just seems like there's just people see his comedy from different perspectives, which is why he's either called the greatest comic of all time or transphobic. I mean, I think people really take, and you guys can jump in, but I do not take Dave's comedy at face value or one dimensional. Even if he says something that might sound transphobic, I know he's not being transphobic. I know what he's doing is he's really holding us accountable. It's like Dave Chappelle didn't curate transphobia or racism or whatever, anti-blackness. Like, this stuff lives, and what he's doing is he's holding our face to it and saying, this is you guys.
Right.
This
He's
is your
been a
world.
comedian.
Yes.
So-
yes.
Can I beam in here as the space Jew for a second?
I
You
have
know,
to
like
leave now, but this has been amazing. Thanks. Nice talking
Thank
to you
you.
all.
Thank you, Abby.
So like this is why at the beginning I was like, we can talk about the subjective question of whether or not this was a good comedy set, and like the objective question about like whether or not, and in my opinion, the objective question about whether or not this was transphobic. You know, as a comedy set, I personally didn't experience it as good. I didn't laugh. I had chuckled maybe once or twice. And like the Space Jew punchline to me is the classic example of what was weak about this set. He didn't do anything with it. I love a Space Jew joke. I am all here for making jokes about Jews from space, but he just like dropped it and then repeated it and did nothing else. Like, you know, in a year in which Marjorie Taylor Greene has already handed him Space Jew lasers, the fact that he couldn't riff on that any further, it just felt tired to me. And a lot of the punchlines I thought were very like 2010 anti-woke kind of tired punchlines. So I guess, you know, that was why subjectively I didn't find it particularly funny. I don't think that it was like too brilliant that I didn't understand it. I think I definitely like do get what Chappelle is referencing 99% of the time. I do think that there is this move that is made sometimes where like he's making an argument and people respond to that argument, and then everyone's like, well, he's just joking. But he's not just joking. He was very obviously, I think, making a specific claim here about things like anti-blackness. But he didn't do a good job. And so like I think we need to talk about how, you know, in the last 20 minutes where he is doing the most meaty part of the material, you know, he's also arguably like waving the bloody shirt of a dead trans friend who can't speak for themselves in this situation, and using their death, which he implicitly blames on the LGBTQ community, to deflect criticism from him, because he really is, I think, somewhat thin-skinned about the criticism that he's received on these issues. So I think, you know, we need to acknowledge that and recognize that that's not a good step on the path towards empathy that he's calling for here.
I was going to say, from the activism standpoint, it's really hard. It's really hard when you're, even as a comedian, when you're creating active, or when you're a part of activism, to be a catch-all. And I think we've acknowledged that even in the end, when he throws the mic and says, "Stop punching down on my people," I still think he's talking about that very specific subset of detractors as opposed to the whole community. And I reference this in the sense of like, even America's favorite time to talk about in history, the civil rights movement that led to the Civil Rights Acts of 63, 64, 65, right? We all love to talk about that. Very few people know that Dr. King and Malcolm X were in the same place one time. And not only were they in the same place one time, it was a manipulated thing by Malcolm's team for the photo op, right? So when you're on the Venn diagram of activism, what Dave, and I think Dr. Lindsey was referencing this, what Dave was talking about definitely is a reflection of the type of people who would enjoy that argument. And so no matter what, the people who are maybe seeking to take down the same overlord but want to do it a different way are going to take offense at the fact that he doesn't see it their way either. But when it comes to an entire movement of taking down a common enemy, there's always going to be multiple ways with which that occurs. Go for it, Doctor.
Lindsey.
Oh no, I I'm protective of, I guess, of Malcolm X's legacy, and I find the comment of like manipulated for a photo op to be a bit.
I don't mean it in a
think
negative
that
context.
happened.
Land with my spirit.
I'm sorry.
Well,
I didn't
I'll
mean
just
that in a
say-
negative context.
yeah,
I meant that in the sense of like the two camps didn't agree to meet with each other. It was a
They met at
photo op.
Capitol Hill.
Yes, correct.
And the photographers were already there, and they're there for a separate
Right.
reason. I did an essay on this, and they
Yes.
met. I don't think he at all was manipulated. It was a moment, and they captured it.
I used the wrong word
Yeah.
there. I apologize. You're correct. The language that I used was an incorrect language. I meant that it wasn't necessarily like you said the right words. The photographers were there. Yes.
Yeah, they captured it, but he had nothing to do with that. They got the moment. Yeah. Let me bring in my friend Angel. Oh, Lindsay, do you have something?
Go ahead. I mean, for the record, Malcolm X did meet Coretta Scott King, who's also just as valuable, and that was on behalf of Tuskegee Institute students who wanted them to meet because they felt that the students themselves felt a gap, or felt that there needed to be some sort of synergy, and organized for them to meet. They were organized for them to gather, and they met again in Selma. So I guess just if we're just gonna do some history things, it's good to bring.
And I'll just say, wrap that up with Dr. King. Often, or not Dr. King, but Malcolm X. When Dr. King died, he would write Coretta letters of support.
America doesn't know that. Like the larger American people don't know that. Right. That's what I mean. That's what I mean in the sense of the larger American people don't know the depth of that history. They think, right? They think that all activists knew each other and were friends, and that obviously Dr. King and Malcolm X must have had, this elaborate and deep, because no one has ever taught them the actual legitimacy.
I think people think that they're always supposed, but that's not even.
The white people I went to college with do not know any of that.
Okay, well, let's just stick with Dave. Okay, Angel, can we get some of your? This is my Twitter friend Angel. I asked him to come on, and can you give us some backstory, like, because you've been vocal about this on Twitter. What did you think of the closer? And then, anything else you want to add that you've been listening? Because I know you've been listening to this for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I tuned in a little bit late, so forgive me if I tread ground that you've already been on. But man, it's so tempting to jump on that Malcolm X thing. I really want to defend my brother Malcolm. There's so much about him that people don't know that they should.
I apologize if it seems like I am.
No.
I wrote my very first 6th grade paper on. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was in 6th grade.
No. This is not at all an aspersion on you. Just in general, I keep popping into video chats where someone says something about Malcolm as like an unrelated comment, and I just want to jump on that for 45 minutes. But man, I don't know. It's hard to distill all my thoughts here, but generally, I love Dave Chappelle. I love what he does. And I do think that he is the greatest comedian walking the earth that I know about, at least. And part of the reason that I think that is because he makes the decision to touch on difficult things. And I think that there's a value, whether he's right or wrong about whatever point he's making, and whatever angle he's choosing to take on a particular topic. I think the fact that he's touching on sore spots and the fact that he's prompting these conversations, I think, is an inherent good. It's good for us to talk about these things because the anger and the outrage and the disconnection and the miscommunication means to me that these are conversations, these are topics that we need to learn how to talk about better. We need to get better at talking about them. And that includes Dave. He also is part of the conversation, and he's also part of the learning how to communicate better. I don't think he's transphobic. I think he's as transphobic as he is racist against white people or black people, or that he hates babies or anything else that he jokes about, right? I think that, at least in my mind, the comedy club and the comedy stage and the comedy special is a very specific context that is kind of an intellectual Wild West, right? So when it comes to Dave Chappelle, for example, I laugh at his jokes many, many times, even when I totally disagree with the underlying point that he's using his joke to, convey, right? So even if I disagree with him about he makes a joke about policing and I laugh, but I don't necessarily agree exactly with his stance on that particular situation, right? I don't necessarily agree with him about this particular situation on racism. So, many of you brought up specific instances where it's like, he kind of fudged this, he kind of did that, right? And I can see all of those things and I can still laugh at the joke and I can still see the context for what it is, right? And I think that, I do think he's trying to say something. I think he's an artist trying to express himself, right? But it is in a particular context, and I do think that context matters. But one thing that I guess I just wanted to bring up is it wasn't in Sticks and Stones, but it was the kind of the addendum to Sticks and Stones. Like if you dig into Netflix, you can find it. It's like an extra 20 minutes or something when he was on Broadway and he was talking about it. And he talks more about Daphne Dorman. He talks more about that relationship. And he said something that I never forgot, which is that Daphne told him, people get mad at you for making these jokes because they say that the jokes normalize transphobia, right? Or something to this effect, right? They're normalizing hatred against trans people. But they never say that just the existence of the jokes, just the fact that you're pointing at us and saying something normalizes us as people who exist, right? And I think there's something really important there because Dave does come after everybody the way that Dr. Lunsford said. Lunsford, sorry. He does come after everybody. He bombs on everyone, and it's to switch comedians briefly. It's kind of like I see it as almost like a Don Rickles thing. When Don Rickles points to you and starts berating you, it was called getting rickled, and it was an honor. It was a kind of, oh my God, I can't believe he picked me to, just completely destroy. And I think a lot of it is probably just my personal attitude. A lot of it is just the way that I am. I'm okay with hearing things that I'm like, I kind of winced at that, but then I kind of laugh at the fact that I winced. So, there's some therapy going on there probably for me, but, but yeah, I think that maybe that's overlooked, right? I think that maybe what's important here is the fact that Dave didn't have any compunction about taking trans people and putting them into this bin of everyone that he bombs on, right? And then of course when that gets a certain reaction, he's a comedian. He's going to cross the line. The whole point of comedy is to be outrageous and to be absurd and to exaggerate and to just go crazy. That's part of what makes comedy, right? And Aaron was talking about many of the his subjective judgments. Like, I don't think that joke worked. I have plenty of those of my own, right? I don't think he nailed this one. I think he could have done more with that. The space shoes thing, I laughed. I thought it was really funny, and I would have loved to have gotten 5 more minutes of that, right? So I think that it's just, we're kind of mixing all these different conversations into one giant ball and then freaking out at the ball, where I think maybe we need to take a step back and kind of tease things out.
Brittany?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Oh, I was just going to speak on something that Angel said. I think that a lot of times when it comes to this type of thing, especially when it comes to Dave, is like, there's this idea of like, he jokes on everybody, everybody catches the joke. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, in the sense that there needs to be a way for us to joke on everybody. There needs to be a way for us to joke on white people, on black people, on trans people, on everybody. Has to be able to catch the joke, right? There can't be this one community that we're just not allowed to say anything about. And I think there is a way to joke about that, though. I think there are ways to tell jokes that don't lead to greater harm, right? I think that he told some jokes in there that were still funny and weren't offensive or anything like that, weren't transphobic. I think that his joke about Mike Pence, for example, being like a closeted gay man, like, I thought that was hilarious, or even when he talks about the feminist movement needing like a strong male leader, and him being willing to take on that, that responsibility. It's funny, but like the question that you ask yourself then is like, why is that funny, right? The reason why those things are funny is because we all have a recognition that those things are ridiculous, right? We know that it's crazy to think that the feminist movement would hail Dave Chappelle as like, or any man as the leader of the movement. It would be antithetical to the movement itself, right? And even the Mike Pence joke, like no one has brought up the fact that Mike Pence is gay or thought of Mike Pence being gay. It's ridiculous, and it's just something that we laugh about because we understand that it's a joke. And so when these things come up, when homophobic comments are made or transphobic jokes or anything like that are made, and we say something about it, when people come back with the retort of like, oh, it's just a joke and he's joking on everybody, my question is, okay, what's the joke? Right? Like, what is it what is the end goal of this joke? What are you actually saying in the joke? Because we know Dave, right? Dave is not just telling jokes without any end game in mind or without having any point that he's trying to make. And I know that a lot of times, again, like other people were saying, like Abby was saying earlier too, he's a comedian. And so obviously, like, we have this special thing with comedians where it's like, okay, they're trying to be funny. Why are we taking it so seriously? This is not a debate or anything like that. This is not a debate show, whatever. But with people like Dave, I think we do hold him to a high regard because we know how intelligent and brilliant that man is and how he is trying to communicate something in the social political space with everything that he's saying. So,
sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that's important to note, but I think, kind of like what Kyle was talking about, the joke that Kyle was talking about where he was like, I'm going to tell you what the punchline is, and I'm going to repeat it in 10 minutes and you're still going to laugh. That's how good I am. Right? That punchline was, I kicked her right in the pussy. It's the stupidest, most juvenile thing in the world, right? So yes, Dave is very smart, and Dave is often playing with many layers in his comedy, but he's also not at all above a dick joke or a pussy joke or, anything completely just ridiculous, because I think it's important to remember that his first job is to say things he thinks are funny. And the skill comes in at, let me figure out what the vast majority of people are going to agree with me about what's funny so that they laugh, so that I succeed at what I'm supposed to be doing. And the other thing is just, the jokes that you pointed out, right? Like the feminist jokes and the Mike Pence jokes, right? There are plenty of people who love those jokes, and I have no problem with that because they don't give a fuck about Mike Pence, right? Or they don't give a fuck about those kinds of feminists, at least. Right. And I think part of the issue here is that everybody loves it when comedians cross the line, except when it's their line. And I guess my personal thing is just, I recognize that. And so I try really hard not to have any lines. I want him to make me uncomfortable. I want him to say things that I go, ugh, because then I know I'm touching on something important. Something's happening here in my brain. And that's one of the reasons I value comedy so much. So there's that as well.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I want to push back on Angel a little bit here because I think he is correctly characterizing one criticism of people who've challenged Chappelle that I think is flawed, which is this implication that like it's ideological capture that is causing you to not find this funny, or it's, because he's attacking your sacred cows that you are suddenly being critical of his comedy. And I think that's not a very fair critique, especially because a lot of people, especially in this room, have like leveled very specific criticisms about what we think went wrong here and talked about like the idea of punching down and these sort of things. And like this idea of the importance of starting a conversation that Angel's putting forward, I agree with. Angel knows that I'll have a conversation more than anybody, but there's better and worse ways to start a conversation. And Angel, I spend a lot of time trying to get people to start conversations in better ways. So I think it's a reasonable critique to say, yes, he started a conversation, but did he do it well? Like if I was a comedian, right, and I got up and I did 50 minutes where I dropped the N-word over and over again, and I didn't earn it in any kind of way, but like the last 15 minutes were me saying, here's this black comedian who thinks I'm very funny. They're dead now, but they think I'm very funny, so back off of my comedy. I think everyone would reasonably recognize that that was really bad for a lot of reasons, and I would be criticized. And we wouldn't say, oh, well, he started a conversation about race, right? Like that's not, I think, a reasonable response when like Chappelle, an expert at what he's doing, fails to, I think, correctly target the jokes in the right kind of ways. Because yes, you can make fun of everybody, but there are right and wrong ways about making fun of people. He does it sometimes. Like he sometimes makes LGBTQ jokes that he targets them in the right way, like the car one that I mentioned earlier, where he makes a joke about almost everybody in the car, and they're all, I think, in various ways accurate to the community and funny. But there are other ways where he just doesn't do that, and instead, you know, makes some pretty crass jokes that don't go anywhere, and then is sort of defensive when he's called out for it, which I think is not starting a conversation at all.
That's, yeah, and that is totally valid to say. I think the only thing I would point to there is that where you draw the line at where he becomes crass or where he's joking in the wrong way is going to be different than where I draw it. Or
yeah, but let me be clear.
Kyle
I draw
does,
it
or
farther
Jeremy.
than almost every human being. I will point people to Doug Stanhope's set about Jews. Everybody Google Doug Stanhope Jews if you want
Yeah,
10
I've seen
minutes
it.
of the most line-crossing comedy you will find. But it's brilliant. It's way better than the Space Jews line in this one because he like
Sure.
earns it and then he works it, right? He works the awkwardness in the right kind of ways. And I think it's fair to say, you know, Chappelle whiffed on this one, and hopefully he'll do better next time, and hopefully he will grow some between now and, you know, the break he's taking and whatever he does next.
I think that's totally fair, and I think, but I guess again, I think it's kind of what I was talking about before, where now we're kind of fusing two different conversations together. We can have a technical conversation about whether that joke landed, whether his, you know, on a craft level, he's doing what he should be doing, and then there's another conversation about what his intention is, who he is as a human being, what he cares about, who he hates, who he doesn't hate. And I feel like a lot of that stuff gets thrown into all the criticism that you're bringing up right now.
I don't think anyone in this room is trying to make an argument about we know what's in Dave Chappelle's heart of hearts. I think
I'm
all of us
speaking
are making
generally,
an
not-
argument.
Yeah.
I know, but like, I don't think it's valuable to criticize like the people on the Twitter who think that Dave Chappelle is a transphobe. Like, that's their impression to have, but like we're having, I think, a conversation about whether the content itself was transphobic, and that's a separate question from the you know, artist's intent to some extent. And I think we can say he wasn't intending to be transphobic, but he succeeded in doing so because he failed at XYZ.
I guess it depends on how you define transphobia. I have a hard time defining that without the intention of the person, right? Like, you know, and we've talked about this before. You and I have done podcasts before, so we've talked about this, where disconnecting the intention of the messenger from not even the message, but like the receptacle within which the message is supposed to be, it starts to get hairy and it becomes super subjective there. So I don't know, but I don't think, I mean, I don't think that if Dave doesn't hate anybody, I don't think that he can communicate his hatred of anybody. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Could I ask you a question, Angel? And I know other people probably have things they want to say about that too, but do you think that it's possible to be racist without intending to be, and to be racist without actively hating someone, you know, like difficult. Actively hating like a Black person?
Yeah, like I think, you know, so I think that someone can receive something you said as racist, even if you didn't mean it that way, right? And it can have that effect for them in that moment, right? They can feel the feelings, you know, they can mishear you and they can feel the feelings. And it's not really about that for me, because that's understandable. Like, that stuff happens, right? So yes, and it, you know, then we're talking about systems and stuff like that that have outcomes that we label racist because of, you know, disparities based on those groupings and that sort of stuff. So I'm acknowledging that, but, you know, just to keep it right here for a second, I think the important part in this case is about what we do next. What do we do with that, right? So we can say, I didn't like that. That made me feel this way. And what I see, you know, unfortunately, like, I keep referring to the larger conversation because that's what I'm largely responding to. But what I see is the reaction happens, right, within the person, and then the person responds as though the reaction was intended. And that's where the problem starts, right? So knowing that Dave Chappelle means me no harm, even when he makes a joke that makes me bristle or makes me feel really terrible or makes me feel really insecure or touches on something that I'm sensitive about, knowing that he he didn't mean to harm me, right? I know what the context is. I know what his intentions are. That changes the way that I react because I'm cognizant of those two, the dynamic is working in two directions. And I think we need to get better at doing that because communication is difficult. And, again, we can talk more technically about whether Dave nailed something or not. And I can agree completely with Aaron about, like the Space Jews thing. I totally agree with him about that stuff. And there are many things in the special and all of his specials that I agree are, he kind of flubbed that, or I don't agree with that. That wasn't very good. But overall, I appreciate what he's doing, and I appreciate his willingness to do it, and I appreciate the honesty with which he does it.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. No. I can ramble. So
I think Lucy has something.
I just wanted to like kind of put the disclaimer that Black people in no way can be racist, just because of the way that racism works. Maybe they can be prejudiced, but the way that racism implies systemic power, the ability to change people's outcomes. So there's no reverse racism there. So, so I just wanted to be clear about that. And I do appreciate him asking the question, Dave Chappelle in the special, can gay people be racist? And I think that is something that is missed a lot. And so I just had 4 quick points I wanted to touch on really briefly that were brought up. One of the things, 2 of the jokes that I think that were going on that people like to gloss over and not extract. I get that some jokes may have landed, some have not have landed, but I kind of hear the argument of his jokes don't land after people have brustled down this argument that he's transphobic. Then it's well, it wasn't funny to me. Well, who said he's perfect, that he had to be perfect, or that the jokes were all for you? And so one of the things that I would say about that is, so he says clearly with the joke about getting into the fight and a white gay person was going to call the cops on him. He says that gay people are a minority until they need to be white again, which is so powerful and such a clear critique of the LGBTQ community that's made by people from within the LGBT community. But people don't want to speak on that. It's no, he's transphobic. Then he brings up the issue of of a fan who doesn't like his work, and he's oh, well, she's an old white woman. She's a white woman. Of course, she looks like hell because she's old. This is something that an old comedian, Red Fox, there's nothing on earth uglier than an old white woman. Why are these jokes so hurtful? Oh, because white women get up in arms, because you're standing up what is for as long as this country's been a country, has been the prevailing standard of beauty, which is a white woman, and you're denouncing that, and you're just cutting it through with a punchline, and that is upending white supremacy in a 7-line joke, right? So that's going to cause these guttural reactions to people because anti-Blackness and white supremacy is so entrenched within us. So these jokes are but not spoken on because it's a different banner that gets flown. And the last 2 points, one, we have to remind ourselves that this country loves a nigga hunt. And I'm just going to be upfront about it. And but by a nigga hunt, I mean an all outdoors manhunt. We've been designed to do this. From slavery days, escaped slave, fugitive, cops, OJ. Loves a good nigga hunt. So the minute a Black man has done something bad, it's what do you do? You've got 4 centuries of rage ready to be unleashed. And what did he say? Yeah, wow! The noises white people make when they're ready for a lynching, all that fury is ready to be unleashed because we have a country that loves a good nigga hunt. Only people that like a nigga hunt more than niggas is white folks. So this country's primed and always ready for a nigga hunt. So I'm always cautious when a Black man is being held up as the poster child for any one mass crime, whether it be rape, whether it be transphobia, whether it be anything. Because I know this country love a good nigga hunt. So I think this is a moment where Dave Chappelle said that as well with all the Cliffords that have been denounced. And the last point, you brought up something very interesting, Angel, when you talked about the style of humor. So Black people for a long time have had to do comedy because when we was getting whooped and beat in slave rooms and raped in French Bordeaux, we in New Orleans, we used jokes. We had humor. It was dang, he whooped you about 90 times. We had to find ways to get out of that, right? And so humor is something that is pivotally tied. There's research on it. There's a whole body of literature, the way that humor is tied to Black joy and Black pain and Black struggle. And we have something in our culture called the dozens, where we play the dozens, where we laugh at our mom's big feet or our uncle's bunion or our cousin's gray hairs. Like, these are things that for a well-meaning, high-to-do, polite white society come off as, oh, crass. Oh my God, you did not just say that. I thought it, but you said it. And so when you take Black culture and you put it up in front of the masses and we laugh the way we laugh, and it's very interesting when we investigate things under the white gaze versus without the white gaze. So if you're under a white lens, I'm sorry, a lot of things will not be funny to you because they are not written for you. They're not for you. And that's okay. But the fact that you think everything has to be for you or is meant for your consumption is problematic. So those are my last points on that. Thank you.
I just want to say one more thing.
No,
Okay. After that,
no, I'm just
first
joking.
off, I'm gonna see. Lewis, do you hear me? Can you hear me? This is a viewer.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, we're gonna get to you. Someone said they had something, Kyle. Or
Yeah, I just want to say one last
Angel.
thing.
Okay, sorry.
Kind of touching on what you were saying, Dr. Lunsford. So I have a group chat with my siblings. If anyone saw this group chat, they would be horrified, and they would think that we loathe each other. But there's so much love there in all the bombing and the dozens, like you're talking about. Like, I remember growing up in Living Color, the Dirty Dozens, that game show. That was my favorite thing in the world. It was the best. I love roasts. I love that stuff. And that's how we kind of bomb on each other, and we communicate in that way. And it's not for everybody. Some people, like my wife is kind of like, I can't even be in that group chat. It's insane, and she's like, I'm not going to do this. Like, I can't. But we love each other more than anything. And we have a closer relationship than a lot of people that I know who have siblings. They're like, oh, I don't talk to my brother. I don't talk to my sister. And I couldn't imagine that. Right. So there's that. There's insult. And then there's this kind of thing of bombing with love. And maybe it's twisted, and maybe there's, some psychological stuff going on there. Right. But I think the love is present, and the love is palpable if you really want to see it. And I think that's another thing that's going on with Dave. Like Aaron mentioned, the admirable thing that Dave did about walking away from his show because it was being co-opted by the wrong people, right? And I think, it's interesting that he did basically that in this last special. He said, it's over. I'm done. I'm not making another joke about this until we are both sure that we are laughing together. And that's exactly why he walked away from the show, because he wasn't laughing the way that guy was laughing. And he didn't like that, right? And that's how he ended the show. He said, no more, right? Like, I'm not doing this until we are laughing together. That, to me, signals that everything that you heard in the previous, 50, 60 minutes was bombing with love. That's what I think. That's how I came away from it. And, like, stop punching down on my people and all that sort of stuff. We can talk about that. But, and I even think that, the beautiful nuanced line that he had where he was talking about Daphne and he was talking about Daphne's daughter. And he said the line, I can't wait to meet Daphne's daughter so that I can tell her, I knew your father and she was a wonderful woman. That, to me, is him drawing a very fine line and making a case for what he recognizes and what he doesn't. And humanity is definitely something he recognizes. He recognizes Daphne, and Daphne is supposed to stand in for the community as a whole, right? I think, at least. And I think that also gets lost. It's easy to miss that because we're so angry about some of the things we heard before. So bombing with love is what I think he's trying to do. Whether he succeeds or not is another question. But I just wanted to say that.
I want to get back to that. But Lewis, hi, you've been patient. So do you have a question or comment for the panel?
Yeah. So I'm not exactly in advance. Excuse my voice. I'm having allergies right now, so it's acting up. But I'm taking a more individualistic stance because I am way younger. All of you are adults, so I can't really speak on certain factors. But a comment I would say.
Do you mind disclosing your age?
Yeah, I'm 18.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So where I'm in right now, Dave Chappelle is such a cultural force that people of all ages love him. I know people who are making the way to their 90s and they love him, and I know people who are way younger than me and they love him. And where I am at right now, there are certain topics that Chappelle addresses that you cannot touch, whether it be from a serious heterodox point of view or a humorous point of view. And I'm not a big fan of the whole, specifically in school, I'm not a big fan of the whole, oh, your kid's a communist kind of argument. But these are still very sensitive, hot button topics that you cannot touch. So considering my generation, where our generation, at least in the social media landscape, is known for this sort of absurdist humor, when there's someone like Chappelle who sort of offers us this paradox where he offers us the same humor we sort of encourage amongst ourselves, but in a very in a very in your face way that may get in the face of certain people and it may make them uncomfortable. Yet he has that glimmer, he has that charisma that makes you think about it, and it offers, especially my generation who has this this sort of Gnostic, I don't know if y'all know that word, this sort of Gnosticism of like, we have this, due to technology, we have this perceived view on all the evils of this world, so we must speak on it. But when Chappelle gets in our faces and tears down every factor of all of what we think, we don't know how to respond. It's a very healthy paradox. So I think that whether it be Chappelle's technique, whether it be his, or maybe his shortcomings, I think we can all agree that he's a healthy force. And sort of to when I remember I was sort of, I don't know if you ever heard of him, but his name is Michael Malice. He's sort of this internet troll, and he's also this political figure. And he was talking about Trump and his sort of his cult following. And he was talking about how we need to realize that Trump is not the river, he's the dam. That he's sort of, we should be not focused on Trump himself, but the people who follow him. His dangerousness is not him, but the people who follow him. So when I look at someone like Chappelle, who tears down everyone, no matter who, he in a way is sort of holding back the dam, because when we start being scared to talk about anything, there is a lot of repression that comes into that. So when Chappelle goes in, he is sort of making his way around the dam. He's not acting as, around the river. He's not being a dam. He's not holding it back. But at the same time, he is, he's getting in our faces. I keep saying that a lot. But as, I don't know if it's Angel or Angel, your last name is kind of Hispanic, but Angel made the point that when he had to stop, he stopped when they weren't laughing for the same reason. So it's also that Chappelle, he has his standards. But when we understand that he's a comedian, we need to understand, at least in my point of view, that he doesn't give a damn about our standards. It's only when it affects, I would say, very rightfully, when it affects him as an artist and his morals, that's where he needs to be like, okay, I'm out where I'm in. So that's my point of view.
Thank you for that. That was awesome. You're 18. You're very insightful.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. He brings up a good point, and there's a question I want to ask you guys, and it's very broad, but what's the point? Besides laughing, what's the point of comedy? Anyone? Because I think this is the point. I think
there's a lot of points.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of points. I think like Dr. Lunsford and Angel are pointing to one, which is that it builds community and reinforces connections, and that we, are happy as we're, and like it creates comedy, and then also it promotes truth. Like the point that a lot of people are pointing to here is that like comedians are truth tellers, and they push the bounds for the sake of us seeing sort of what is beyond those bounds. And I need to push back a little bit, I feel like, on what feels like that, you know, when people make what I think are sort of discrete claims about criticisms about this particular special or the way that he made certain jokes here, and why we think that they didn't illuminate, that they obscured rather than illuminating in this kind of way, the response I feel like I often get is, well, you just didn't get it, or you don't like transgressive comedy, or it wasn't for you, or something like that. And I, you know, maybe that's the case, but I also think that that's not necessarily a response to specific claims. So, for like example, Dr. Lunsford's reference to the gay people are a minority until they need to be white again, there's probably a meaningful conversation there. But I also think there's a meaningful conversation that for Chappelle, gay people are a minority until he needs them to be white for his punchline. And like that causes problems. And I think we can have that conversation alongside the conversation, the intersectional conversation about, you know, whiteness and gayness and blackness, and, you know, what these how these different communities have different experiences with law enforcement and such like that. You know, I think it's valuable to bring these kinds of criticisms, and it shouldn't be seen as not understanding what Chappelle was doing. I think we all understood what Chappelle was doing. Some of us just think that he was not making the best arguments and not doing the right thing to some extent.
I think that you make a great point, Aaron. For me, I don't think, well, one reason why I actually want to have this conversation is because of how polarizing this specific special was, and that I said on Twitter, and I said on, I don't know, another thing, Instagram maybe, and to my friends that are in the trans community, I told them, to me, I would feel, for me, I'm saying, I would feel ignorant if I didn't take in consideration of the criticism. If I just said, I don't care, like it didn't bother me, or, oh, he's not transphobic, you don't get him. The fact that enough people are outraged, I'm like, okay, there's something here and I need to listen. This is why I did call my friends before I did this special, or this episode that's in the trans community, because they're saying a lot of things that Aaron has expressed. They said that, particularly when Dave Chappelle walked away from $50 million, my friend said he had that insight to know, or when he heard an earshot of that executive and that producer laughing in a way that he didn't intend, that producer was laughing at Black people, or so to speak, and not at the joke. Why can't he bring that logic or insight in with maybe the trans community and saying, okay, it's not landing in the way that he means it. If he does mean, I'm getting at the line and I'm not going after you, I'm trying to humanize you in a sense, or I'm trying to show that you're equal, you're just like everyone else, because I do go after everybody. But if it's not landing, she's like, is that his responsibility? Like, should a comedian have some responsibility about a joke if it doesn't land the way he intends it to land, or does he let it go and we deal with it? Like,
I feel like that's part of a cultural thing that's happening with regard to the idea of cancellation, in the sense of, like, you become responsible not only for in this individual instance, like Dave is usually trying to take down the white overlord, right? But that means that in the context of doing that, if you are not doing that the way that I wish you were doing that, then your language is offensive. Even though it's technically the same language, that language is now offensive to me. And I think that's the I don't know. I don't have an answer. I was just bringing that as a thing that I find even just, as you said, processing this of a very large cultural challenge of what are we to be held responsible for, in the sense of, like, I feel like they want to destroy the physical embodiment. Or sorry, I feel like some people want to destroy the physical embodiment of the white overlord, and some people want to destroy the entire fabric of the white overlord. And if that's the case, then this style of comedy falls in the fabric of that. And Dave being able to walk away from $50 million and then still come back and get his is an embodiment of the privilege that he receives, you know, as a man, right? That those arguments can be made that he is a part of colonialism now. Now, whether or not I believe that is not I don't necessarily believe that, but I feel as if part of that anti-colonialism mentality that comes behind cancel culture is in there as well, in terms of that who takes responsibility when the intent and the impact don't line up.
Yeah, I just want to say quickly about that. So me personally, I'm very much against like placing responsibility on people who are sharing ideas that produce results within people that they didn't intend at all. You know, I think that you can only really be held responsible for just how properly you try to communicate that message, right? But I don't think necessarily, for example, that if a trans person, you know, watches Dave's special and then they commit suicide or something like that, I don't think that Dave should be held responsible for something like that, you know? But I mean, with that said, I do think that there are better things that could have been done with the special. And I think that this may be indicative of just like a culture shift that's happening in a similar way, not completely analogous, but in a similar way to the fact that, you know, probably 100 years ago or whatever, comics used to do stand up in blackface, you know what I mean? And at a certain point that became anathema. You know, if somebody came up today and tried to do something like that, we would all, you know, rightfully criticize that person, right? And I'm just wondering if maybe there's some sort of culture shift happening now, you know, where we're all just sort of recognizing that there are some, well, not all, I mean, there obviously there's people that disagree, but where a lot of the country, a large portion of the country is recognizing that there are things that they're not willing to tolerate, right? And I think that may only be for the better, but I'll stop there.
I would say for me, to answer the question, I think comedy can do a lot of things. It can harm, educate. But for me, my interest in comedy is its ability to shift narrative, and in doing so, redistribute power or shift power narratives. So you think about a monarchy or like a court, where you would have like a court jester. So like the proximity to power. So like the ability, who has the microphone, who's being listened to, who is like impacting the national tone and conversation. 2 quick points I would just add is I think it was mentioned earlier by you, Aaron, about him only speaking about Daphne, you know, kind of using her as a trope, like kind of how this is my gay friend, and it's really bad to talk about her now that she is deceased and not able to speak about herself. But I think Angel mentioned, like, he's been mentioning her in his stand-ups. And I think it was very genuine that even though after she passed, he didn't stop mentioning her, but then further talked about her story and the way that online bullying can play a part in, which is all of this, right? This feeling that we can get on the internet and massively get people to change their actions by showing our disdain and our disgust, how that, like, you know, contributed to, or could have had any possible contributions to her demise. And then lastly, I also love how people like get mad when they want to get mad and not mad when they don't want to get mad. And also just, again, the parallel, because I think it was said earlier too, Aaron, when you're like, if I were to get up on stage and say like the N-word a whole bunch of times, that to me was just triggering to even hear. And I think it's because like you can't just reverse things like that. Like, well, what if a white person does it? It kind of takes away the power and the mystique of the argument that he's trying to project. And the last thing, you mentioned the car joke. So in the last stand-up with the car joke, people never talk about how he was actually standing up for trans people within the LGBTQ community. So he mentions how the trans person T is in the back of the car and they're making the ride so much longer and so much harder for G and L, which is like lesbian and gay people, and how like the trans person is actually, they're in the car, but like no one really wants them there, which is a very valid critique on the way from trans people on the way that trans people are treated within the LGBTQ community. So for someone that just hates and completely does not see the humanity of trans people, to be able to articulate that argument and put that forward, you know, so it's like, I think that to me, like you said, Brittany, like, why would there be so much backlash? Like, I would be ignorant to not want to look into. And so when I started listening and asking my friends in the community, why are you upset? Some of them never watched the whole special. They only listened to clips. They never actually watched it. And so I think, of course, you're upset because anytime someone speaks truth to power about white supremacy and blatantly says, like, F whitey, and by whitey, I mean whiteness and the whole structure, there's always going to be, heads will always roll. So like, I was not surprised by that at all. yeah, but I just want to say people pick and choose. So it's like he's the celebrity we want until he's not telling like mushroom jokes and in the middle of like an opioid epidemic, right? Like, and if he's not telling the kind of jokes that we like, then he's like, you know, an enemy again. So I would just say that.
Okay. Well, someone was on, but they left.
Can I respond since she's sort of?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Aaron. Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, I guess I want to try to make a connection here because, I mean, Dr. Lunsford, I am currently getting a PhD in moral education where I am focusing on things like post-colonialism. I'm very interested in all the things you were saying. And I was fully with you on what you were saying about how, you know, he was being pro-trans in that particular joke about the car. And to me, that just to emphasizes that he knows what he can do and he knows what he's saying. And that like when he falls down on other things, then we should point out that like he missed the mark on that one. Like we all here agree, I think, that comedy can be harmful or it can be helpful, right? And that context matters, as you just pointed out, that like me being a white person makes it different, just like Dave Chappelle being a very rich person makes it different, what he says and how he says it. And so I think, you know, my feeling is I want to have that conversation. But whenever I try to hear what I see are the criticisms, instead of addressing those criticisms, the response is, you were oversensitive because he's attacking your thing now, or you don't understand because you don't come from a culture that makes fun of each other, despite like, you know, coming from a space Jew culture, which makes fun of itself all the time for the exact same reasons, right? Surviving being murdered by Cossacks. So like, I'm sympathetic to like 99% of what you're saying. And I just I don't understand why it has to then short circuit the valuable conversation we could have about how there are maybe some specific ways in which this particular special didn't do well on the goal that he was aiming for.
I guess for me, it would be the goalpost kind of like what you consider doing well and what you consider his rates of success are. And then also, I don't think you can conflate, like when you say the exact same struggles, I think that gets into the oppression of Olympics of like comparing Black struggles with Jewish struggles, which is not something I would want to do. And I think when
I was joking. I was literally like making a joke about like how lots of minority groups engage in comedy as a way to cope with being minorities.
And I think that, so my point was, I think that that's diluting the very specific point that I'm making, that Black culture specifically has a history with dozens in the dozen culture and how that's evolved from Black trauma and Black joy. And so to just say like, well, all cultures do it is not what I'm hinting at, is what I was saying there. And so and the other point about his wealth, you mentioned that, and a lot of people keep bringing, well, he walked away from $50 million. It's like, well, Negro, you're lucky they ever saw you. You're lucky they ever let you see a check that big. That's all I hear when people bring up Dave Chappelle's wealth, which is why he brings it up all the time. Like in the last special where he talked about, I should be a Trump supporter. I'm the one he cares about. I'm rich. I'm wealthy. So people love talking about Dave Chappelle's $50 million check, but they never tell you how much Seinfeld made per episode. Right. And so I think that even gets within the inequity, like with just even within comics. So it's like Dave Chappelle is a rich man, not a Black man, when it's more fitting for our argument. But unless he can unless a cop pulls him over and they know that, you know, so I think we get back into those things about the punching up and punching down. We want to say he's up because he's rich, but what he's making is a very clear argument about Blackness, which can be extracted from that conversation about wealth. So to say like, well, I'm white, but he's rich, I think is really what he's like, kind of some of the arguments that he's trying to make is that people love to pit this against this and this against that.
Yeah. And all I'm saying is I think he makes good points about intersectionality, but that it's intersectionality for he, but not for thee, that he's not willing to see the intersectionality in the LGBT community the way you're asking us to see the intersectionality of his identity. And I fully agree. The fact that he is a Black person matters, and it's not just that his wealth matters. But if you're going to say, you know, it matters whether I'm a white person doing comedy, then I think it's also true to talk about class. And it's also true to talk about other, you know, male privilege, as Kyle, I think, brought up earlier, that like these are should all be conversations that are on the table. And they like none of them should be shut down as, you know, you're trying to go on
and I think he mentioned all of those in his special, right? So he mentions the fact that he's a man. He mentions his class differences. I think all of that was like really brought out in the special.
I think it's really interesting that what's been going on the last few minutes is kind of what Dave said about gay people are a minority until they need to be white, and then what Aaron said about how yes, gay people are a minority until Dave needs them to be white for the punchline, and then Dave is black when he is speaking truth to the power that we consider the power needs to be spoken truth to, and then when he switches his target, he is now a rich, privileged man, and the black thing kind of goes by the wayside for a second, and it just kind of there's all this shifting going on, and I think it makes sense.
I think this is an unfair conflation. I think that
well,
these are two distinct sorts of things. I think all I was saying is if we're going to be
I wasn't
let's
trying
be
to
intersectional about everybody, right?
Yeah,
Not just some people, right?
No,
and
I agree.
Not the same as
I
saying,
agree.
Chappelle can't say these things because he's rich. Chappelle can absolutely make jokes about whatever community he wants, despite what kind of wealth he has. But what my point was that we should have conversations that are more complex than just the people who are disagreeing with him are disagreeing with him because they are anti-black or something like that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. That's not where I was headed with that. But to answer Brittany's question.
To what you said really quick, Angel, about that conflation. Yeah. So Dave said that gay people are gay until they need to be white again. It was said in here that people are gay until Dave needs them to not be black, which I think that's not fully like a flesh. That is problematic, I think, in there. And then to say that Dave is black until he's wealthy. The thing that I would say in all of these situations is Dave is never not black. So his blackness is never removed from him on the table, whether he's wealthy and black or not. He's always black.
Yeah. I mean, I see what you're saying, but what I was getting at was that it's serving a similar function. What identity category we're emphasizing in any given moment depends on what point we're trying to make. Just like the identity category that he emphasizes depends on what joke he's trying to make. And that was just really, an observation of I find it interesting that everyone is doing this in the conversation, and it was prompted kind of by the fact that he did it in the special. But I was leading to the point of just getting to, to answer Brittany's question. In my opinion, what is comedy for? It is to make people laugh. That is the number one thing. And I think that if that's not a comedian's number one priority, if it's second or third to anything, then that comedian is not going to be funny to anyone except people who agree with that first or second thing, right? And I just think that the first thing is it should be funny, or at least attempting to be funny, right? It's not going to always work, but that is the goal. It's to be outrageous, it's to be crazy and absurd, because that's where funny is generally. Exaggeration is where funny is. Now, my favorite comedian of all time is George Carlin. And the reason is because he made me think. I loved his mind. I loved his wit, right? But if he weren't also funny, if he weren't funny first, if I didn't find him funny to begin with, I wouldn't even call him a comedian. So that's just where I'm coming from. And I think that another thing that needs to be taken into account is I think most comedians have my point of view, at least, from what I can see, right? Someone like Dave is like, listen, I'm going up there and I'm trying to make people laugh. I'm trying to be funny. That's the number one goal. I love listening to podcasts where comedians talk shop and they're talking about the craft, and it's always about the laugh. That's the thing they're chasing, right? Everything is second to that. And the other things could be important, but it's second to that. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because I think another thing that gets lost that makes these conversations more difficult is that, gay people are going to be a minority until he needs them to be something else for his punchline, because the punchline is what he's chasing. And he's going to make something up, and he's going to fudge, and he's going to be totally wrong about a point he's making if the point he makes it funny. And that's kind of getting back to the thing I said at the very, very beginning, where it's like, I'm laughing even when I disagree with him. And the reason is because I think I'm at least trying to also see the craft going on at the same time. And I'm appreciating that part of it. So, the statements that he's making, I appreciate them. I want to hear them. I love his mind. I think he's a brilliant guy. But it's secondary to me. And I think a lot of this is the result of many things, but one of them is a discrepancy in what we believe the point should be. And when we say, like, you know, that wasn't helpful, or that didn't do its job, we might be talking about different jobs, right? So my job was that funny first? And then was it interesting? And then was it, you know, super layered and clever? So that's another thing to just throw out.
Yeah, I want to get back to that, Angel, because you're bringing up a good point. But press play. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello, thank you for joining. Do you have a question or a comment?
I have a couple of comments and I guess a couple of questions. I wanted to kind of just add to the conversation that isn't comedy or what's funny kind of like beauty? It's in the eye of the beholder. Not everyone is going to find something funny. So not every joke is going to be funny. You're not going to like every comedian. That's just not the way it works. So can you even really critique something if you, in general, don't like that type of comedy or that comedian? Can you really, really critique it fairly?
Is that to a specific person or?
Not really, but I would love to hear Aaron's opinion.
Aaron's like, okay.
Sure. So I feel like we're on a loop, and this is what is a struggle for me, right? I come in here and I say, look, there's a subjective conversation to be had about whether this thing is funny or not. And there's a separate conversation to be had about whether this thing is transphobic, which I think is more of an objective conversation than whether or not the thing is funny, right? We can have a whole debate about whether comedy is subjective or objective. I think we would actually all agree that, like, there are certain things that just are not funny.
You can't leave that part out. You can't just talk about whether it's transphobic.
Well, so that's the problem. That's the loop, right? So I say it's transphobic, right? And somebody responds, it's comedy. And I say, well, I think it's transphobic because it's bad comedy. And I state reasons why I think it's bad comedy and why it fails to avoid being transphobic. And then they say, well, that's subjective. And I say, well, I think it's not subjective because of these specific claims that are being made about why it is transphobic that have nothing to do with whether or not it is good or bad comedy, in my opinion. But the problem is they do in a sense, because if he made the jokes better, right, then they wouldn't be transphobic because they would be aimed in the right ways and doing the right kinds of things. I just want to add Angel's comment about the truth versus laughter thing. Chappelle doesn't end the show on a laugh line. He ends the show on a truth line. He ends the show on a, here's my opinion. Here's my closing claim. I want you to stop punching down at my people. So if he's making an argument, and I think he is, then we have to assess that and not just the has he been funny or not question. And I think it's fair to assess and say his comedy has not succeeded at making the argument that it was trying to make, separate from whether or not it was funny.
I totally agree with that.
But that's my point, right?
That's totally fair.
Are you even qualified to, like, judge that? That's my point. It's not really going in circles.
I think everyone
I'm
is.
asking what makes you qualified to judge that.
Yeah, I think the minute it's out and everyone can watch it, everyone gets to say whatever they want to say about it, as loud as they want to say it, and as wrong as they are, right as they are, or as technical as they want to get.
Being free to comment doesn't make you qualified, though.
It doesn't matter if I'm qualified. Like, my qualifications don't matter. What matters is I will make specific claims about where I think he does something wrong, and you can assess those claims on their own merits. And you can either say, I didn't ask that. I asked what would make you qualified, not whether it matters if you're qualified.
Oh, I mean, what would make anyone qualified?
Yeah.
I would say that people that have been long-term fans of Dave Chappelle can better critique his career.
I'm eminently qualified.
His jokes.
Yeah, so Aaron is qualified.
That's pretty much all of us, I think.
Yeah.
Right. I asked him what makes him qualified. I don't know why he's being offended. I'm asking him a question so that I can understand where he.
Yeah, I think I'm qualified because I'm qualified because I've loved Dave Chappelle's comedy from the beginning, and I've loved transgressive comedy since I was very young. And like I've spent a lot of time thinking about ethical and less ethical comedy. And so, I mean, but I think everyone here is qualified to make their own assessments. I don't think I have special expertise on this front.
So do people generally, like, I don't know. I don't come to comedy for ethics per se, but or at least not enough to really, I guess, speak in the way you just did of coming to it from an ethics point of view. I kind of just come to comedy to enjoy the comedy, and I enjoy all different types of comedy, all different kind of people, you know. But I feel like if you come to comedy to laugh versus if you come to comedy to critique it, you're viewing it through a different lens. And that kind of goes back to what you all were talking about earlier when you were saying that, you know, being this kind of person doesn't really matter as far as the lens that you come to the table with. Because I think someone had mentioned that a Black person might see this comedy differently than a white person. I think it was Dr. Lunsford, sorry. And I think you disagreed. Why? I don't understand that. I think everyone's history, their socio patterns and like all of that, like it brings all of these people together, but it can also separate them, right? So you and I are different for whatever reason. Wouldn't that make us see a specific comedy different?
Was that a question
I think that's why conversation is so important, because of that, because we're going to see it differently. I think, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Everyone's going to come in with their different lens. I don't think it's wrong to, like Aaron was saying, I think it's totally fair because Dave didn't just make jokes, he made statements. And you can decide to look at the special and say, I'm going to assess the accuracy or the efficacy or the usefulness of his statements. You can do that. That's totally fair because he's making them. And once the product is out for us to see, we have a right to judge it and interpret it, and it becomes ours, you know, in an important way. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's totally fair to critique it that way. And I certainly don't join Aaron's critics in saying, you know, in dismissing his concerns or his critiques as he just doesn't get it or anything like that.
Why? But I don't know. I just think if it's quite possible to not get something. And I think Aaron's point was, no, that's not. And I disagree with him on that.
No, I'm sorry. That wasn't my point.
I'd like for him to kind of elaborate more.
Yeah, let me clarify. I can absolutely not get things, and I'm sure there was at least one joke in that bit that I probably didn't get, and probably because I'm not sufficiently steeped in Black culture, as Dr. Lunsford was suggesting. I think that's true. I just think that's a totally separate question from, you know, half of the special was him making a moral argument about where you should be punching online, and you know, especially where the LGBTQ community should be punching. And as like an ethicist, I think I'm well positioned to critique that part of it, separate from like, you know, the questions about did I get all of the jokes. I mean, I think I got most of the jokes. I think I found a few of them a little bit funny, and again, I think they weren't his best stuff, but that's not the problem. And if all he had done is like gone on and done a weak set and like hadn't made the additional claims that I'm concerned about, then like I wouldn't care. Like I'd be like, he missed one. Everybody misses, you know, like that's even the great misses.
And Aaron, I think that's my confusion. What are the additional claims that you're saying that he made?
Claim like essentially the insinuation that the way that his friend was treated online by the LGBT community was part of that person committing suicide, and that was used as a kind of justification for his claim that that community needs to stop punching down at his tribe. So I think that argument it wasn't supported, and it involves a kind of binary that I think ultimately doesn't hold up. So those are the sorts of things that I think we can talk about, where it's not a question of was he funny or not. It's a question of, you know, did he make those points? Did he back those points up effectively?
Well, and he did the argument tactic where right before he finished that and tossed the microphone, I believe he said, "Now I don't know or don't know whether or not this is the reason that it happened," but it was very much in the energy level of, "But I believe."
Well, but it didn't help. He said it definitely.
That's what I read.
Didn't
That
help.
was the word. It definitely didn't help. Right.
Yeah.
That was the language that he very deliberately chose to utilize in that moment.
So
and there is an interesting wrinkle to this, if I may. There's an interesting wrinkle to this, which is, and I didn't know this until like a couple of days ago, but some screenshots started coming up of after Daphne Dorman committed suicide. Twitter was a rage in blaming Dave Chappelle for it. So that to me speaks to another issue of like, we all need to not take these kind of, you know, I mean, so I don't know. It's intense and it's terrible.
Can I ask a question to Aaron? Are you saying that in the LGBT community that there's no issue amongst just that community and how we can attack each other? Because I would wholeheartedly disagree with that. I would
absolutely
completely disagree that any attacks from within the community itself towards anyone in the community couldn't play a part in if they killed themselves, and trying to remove them from responsibility completely is just not fair.
So let me be clear. I absolutely think that there is various tensions within the LGBTQ community. And that's why, again, I liked the car bit in Sticks and Stones, because it very accurately conveyed several of those tensions. The way that bi people are excluded, for example, comes up there and I think was well argued. And I don't know why this person killed themselves, and Dave Chappelle doesn't either. And neither of us should be insinuating anything about why this person chose to do what they did, much less use it as an argument in a special against an entire community, which is what it feels like I think he did here. All of us, I think.
Why is the entire community allowed to blame him?
I don't think that they are, and I don't think it's good that, like, if he was dragged on Twitter for this, I absolutely am not defending that either, but like, that's not a good reason for him to turn around and do what he did here. And like, a lot of this special feels to me like Dave Chappelle is struggling with the realities of fame, which has always been a part of his struggle with his career, in the sense that, like, there were 3 different stories of people harassing him who recognized him, and like how annoyed he was by that. And like, but at the same time, he said it at one point in the special, Twitter is not real life, in a dismissive kind of way that seems totally incongruous with him later claiming that Twitter was part of his friend's death in this way. So like, I think he's just not being consistent about even his own claims about where harm can come from.
And I guess
real life is like,
Twitter's not a real place.
Say that again.
Right, and he didn't explain it all that meant. He said Twitter's not a real place. He did not elaborate, but then he later, in effect, blames Twitter for killing his friend. It seems like a very real place to me in that sense, and I think it's important.
It has real life consequences.
Yeah, exactly.
But
I think
people go there and they act out in ways that they wouldn't do in public.
Yeah, but I do think Aaron has a point. I do think Aaron has a point, though, because the dismissive comment of Twitter is not real life, and which is
not a
very
real
heavily
place.
Well, it's not a real place, but yes, of course it's not a real place. Like, but I don't think he means that literally, because that would just be a vacuous statement, right? I think parenthetically what's going on is it's not a place that is effectual for me. It's not a place that matters. I don't care because it's not real, right? But of course it's real, because real people are using it, real people are communicating on it, and those communications spill out into the real world, as he points out later on. I mean, I don't think that he, I certainly didn't get the impression that he implied that, Daphne's dragging on Twitter for defending him was responsible. You know, I kind of took him at his word when he said, I don't know what was going on in her life. He also mentioned that, but he did, but he said it didn't help, right? And I can go with that. Of course it wouldn't help. That must be awful, right? Because Twitter is not fake. Twitter is a real thing, and it has real effects. It has consequences, so it matters. So I do agree with Aaron there that there is a contradiction in what he's saying. And I think it's kind of a throwaway comment of like, fuck that. But it's not really fuck that. Of course I care. That's why I'm talking about it. So
my question is even though he said the words, it's not a real place, is the way he responded to the white lady in effect acknowledging how real it is for him, that it's one of those things where you're saying I don't know if there's an actual linguistic term for that I don't know, where you say a thing, but in actuality what you're saying, the words are the opposite meaning of it as it relates to the internal struggle that you're having. I felt like I felt that in the Twitter comment that was the referential callback to the Twitter at the end, is that we can put our chainmail on and say that Twitter doesn't affect us, but at the end of the day, that white lady coming to me talking about what got said on Twitter does in fact affect me as much as it's not a real place. And as you said, it probably didn't help that whatever was happening in Daphne's life on top of those things was potentially going on your phone, and this not real place having real life consequence.
And I actually think those two concepts aren't really even in conflict. Actually, I was agreeing with everything you were saying, Angel, about sort of the dichotomy of what it means for Twitter to be a real place or not a real place. And I think there's a separation between saying that Twitter has, like Press Play was saying, Twitter has real life consequences versus Twitter is not representative of the world, which I think that's all he meant by Twitter is not a real place. So I think those two concepts aren't antithetical at all.
I think I agree. I want to just point out, though, Twitter is not representative statistically, right? But Twitter is what is most often pointed to when cancel culture comes up and people are trying to say, here's where cancel culture is happening, right? And again, maybe that goes back to the consequences stuff as well. I'm very adverse to the idea of dividing these places in this kind of way. Lots of communities aren't demographically representational, but they still have a significant impact on the people in them and the way that they see the world and such like that. So I guess it does feel like a bit of a vacuous throwaway line that then undercuts what he might have been making a point later.
I think sometimes we can get so into the weeds, like that every single word is then analyzed and like, what did he mean that? But he said this, but he should have said that. And so and we miss that a lot of stuff is allegory. Like you mentioned, Aaron, he mentions his 3 different people coming to them. You know that those aren't actual real stories. He uses this allegory to explain larger things, which is like in that instance, he's saying, keep it in the comments, bitch. Like, don't come to me in real life and threaten me with harm. But actually, this is how I want to engage with my fans. My issue with you, I guess, with critiques like yours is that I hear it's kind of like going through something, looking for the fine print, trying to find the well, this is the wrong and this is the wrong. But when you speak directly to the claims that he makes, but when he makes this powerful, definite claim of I am doing this for my people, there's anti-Blackness that are in these movements. People are deliberately not trying to hear me, and I want to be heard on these issues. I can hear people talk for 2 hours all and around this and never mentioning those truths, never mentioning there's a point in that, or this is that. It's always what you're saying is good, but could you have said it like this? Could you have said it like that? And there have been numerous times where I've heard the words right should have been said right or wrong or correct or success. And I think
I jump in right here?
Labels
press
put on to
Sam, yeah.
I'm going to wrap up, Sammy. You got it. Those are different labels that people put on and project that aren't necessarily ascribed by everyone else. So I think that's a white supremacist mindset that tells us to look for things that are correct, that are right, that are, this justified thing. When in reality, what's right, what's correct may or may not be your subjective opinion in that point. And you can go ahead, Sam.
Thank you, Dr. Lunsford. So I watched a special. I was intentional in hearing the message. And I think sometimes we intentionally lose the message because we don't want to hear it. And my opinion of it is all of it wasn't funny, but when I go to Dave Chappelle, I don't just go for funny. I go to hear his take on the subjects that everybody else is afraid to talk about. So funny is secondary to me. When he did the one about George Floyd, it wasn't funny, but I loved it because I wanted to hear his perspective on it. So I go to him when I want to activate my brain. With that said, back to what I was mentioning, I think people are intentionally missing his point. He has said over and over, my problem has never been with anyone in the LGBTQIA community. It has always been with whites. And when he said he's jealous of them, I've said that to myself a million times because their movement is going so well. And I've asked myself multiple times, what is it that Black people were missing? Why is it that we, even to this day, we still struggle with racism, but the Protect Asian movement went so well, it caught on so quickly, and it has been widely accepted and it's going so well. And the LGBTQIA movement has been going so well. And for that, I think the answer is because it has white push behind it. So I think there are some struggles there with racism within the LGBTQIA movement. And I think that's what he wanted to bring to the fore. When a Black man is stopped by the police officer, they don't look at him and see that he's from that community. They see that he's Black. Where is his privilege then? So that's what he means when he says, you are a minority until you need to be white again, because you always have that privilege to pull back on. And I think us going through line by line to critique what he's saying, that is hindering us from seeing the bigger picture. I don't think he's racist. I don't think he's transphobic. But my other question is, why is it that year after year, everybody could make jokes about Black people with impunity? We don't have these conversations, but the trans community is offended and then he needs to be canceled. And that is the part that I struggle to rectify. Why is it that you can offend anybody? You just cannot offend trans people. And I have friends who are gay, trans, lesbians, and well, I guess because they are who they are, they're not at all offended by it. But why is there this public outcry when people constantly go on stage and they refer to Black people as niggers and they perpetuate all these negative stereotypes? And I don't see this outrage. So what I'd like to say finally is, I need to know from the LGBTQIA community, are you seeking equal treatment or are you seeking special treatment? Because if it's equal treatment, then you get to be roasted like everybody else. If you're seeking special treatment, then I don't understand it.
I don't know.
I think we've done a decent. Brittany, now go.
No,
please.
go, Kyle. It's fine.
No, I was saying I think over the course of, it looks like we've been here for 2 hours and 12 minutes. I think we've touched on the aspect of the entirety of the LGBTQIA plus community. The entirety of that community is not asking for his cancellation, rather a specific intersection of that community saying that what he said was essentially beyond the pale and deserves to be removed for being offensive and abusive language. So I think as Sam said, she has friends that, because of the language that they speak and the cultural context that they share, they watched the Dave special as well and said, I understood. I got it to the point with which I understood the larger context of that, and so I don't leave offended. And I think that ends up being where that huge disconnect ends up is, I don't know if this question is going to be useful or not. Do we actually know for a fact, or not, I want to say for a fact, do we actually know who is the boogeyman saying, take this off of Netflix? I'm going to just throw that up there. Who is that boogeyman?
You mean the call to action, like who's doing that?
Yes.
I don't, honestly, I think it's a few people and it's amplified on social media. I think social media is the beast of all this. So that's my take.
And isn't it funny that is the character that essentially Dave puts on trial?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah,
right,
I absolutely
because it
agree.
seems to amplify voices that are the minority of a much larger group, which begs the question, how does that happen? How do the smallest parts of any specific group get amplified so heavily on social media?
There's a bunch of AI data about this actually, and why this stuff gets amplified, because it gets more clicks, it gets more attention, and the goal is to maximize attention and retention and more polarizing content. This is the recent leak from Facebook, was just the latest in sort of this story. Like, the trouble I'm having here is I feel like there's no way to criticize him that doesn't provoke a kind of inconsistent reaction. So we've all agreed that like he's the best of the best of the best with honors, and like he chooses his words very, very carefully. But then we're not allowed to criticize his word choice very carefully, right? We're not allowed to point to like, you know, specific words. And at the same time, like, you know, I showed up here because I wanted to say, here are specific things that I think he did wrong, because I think it's important not just to shout, oh, he's transphobic, but to say, here are the things that seem transphobic to me. But then it's like, oh, well, you're just going through with a fine-tooth comb to trying to find something to criticize him for. When what I'm just trying to do is like, you know, give concrete pieces to the conversation.
This is exactly
so
what
kind
I
of what
May I
she just
respond
said.
to that, please?
Press play. Wait. Press play, and Sam, hold on, because that's exactly what I wrote down. To Aaron's point, I asked. I'm going to ask you a question, because I do feel like we're talking in generalities and everything's getting swathed under one thing, transphobic or not. I want to know, because I'm curious and I genuinely want to know, what is a joke in the closer that would be considered off to you or transphobic about the trans community? And then what's a joke that he made about the trans community that landed? So we can see the contrast to know what is the offense or what's not the offense.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm having a hard time thinking of a trans one from, I mean, well, we could say, for example, right?
You can say any. You don't have to just do closer.
Well, the Daphne joke, right? The one about, you know, I don't have carpets, I have hardwood, is a great, you know, nailer of a trans joke. And the one in the car bit in the previous special, you know, about how trans people are slowing the car down and pissing everybody off, right? Despite everyone thinking that like this is going really great for the LGBTQ, apparently they feel like it's not going fast enough. Like, that to me was a joke that landed, as opposed to the one about like, that's not a real vagina, that's like the beyond, like the beet juice vagina or something like that, where that seems very like, it doesn't do anything, like it doesn't make a good point of any sort. It just sort of attacks what I think is a very difficult issue for a lot of trans people, with having to deal with the medical side of things. So like, that to me is one that I think really didn't land and felt very cringe.
And I can see your point. I honestly, and I remember those jokes, I took all of the jokes that he said very absurd, and I didn't think of it in that way that you're saying. And the wood joke that you talked about that landed sounds similar to that joke that you said was offensive to me.
Yeah, no,
and I'm you know, not in that community, so that could be a blind spot on my end. I'm just saying that's just
right. And this stuff is very hard. I don't want to pretend that like it's easy to distinguish between a joke that lands and one that doesn't, or one where the comedian earns the transgression. And I think it's important to talk about earning transgressions. And I think, you know, sometimes he earns them and sometimes he doesn't. And on this one, he didn't. And like, that can be a difficult thing to nail down exactly how that works. But that would be the argument that I would put forward, at least.
I think another thing is that there are different kinds of laughs. You know, I'm just thinking about it myself as Aaron was describing these jokes. I remember those jokes. I laughed at all of them. And there were different kinds of laughs, right? One of them was a kind of laugh of recognition, like, oh, I see what he's doing there. That's really clever. That's really beautiful the way he did that, right? And then with the beyond joke, that was like, I can't believe he said that. That's hilarious. That's so outrageous and absurd. And it's crazy. Like I, that thought never occurred to me, and he just planted it in my brain, and now it just exploded, and it's laughter. So, it's kind of what we were talking about before. Is the line is different for everybody, and it's difficult, like you were saying, Aaron, that it's difficult to do this because what lands for you, obviously, what landed for you also landed for me, but what didn't land for you landed for me, and is probably every variation of that with every joke that's ever been told. And so this can get very difficult.
And how I know you're right about that, Angel, in terms of how those jokes land in different ways. In the craft aspect of it, he even offered us a softening pre-joke to get us into that one when he referred to his own wife's pussy. Right, that was his way. That was his way of, as Dave and as other types of comedians of this style, it's their way of trying to undercut the pre-argument of, you only talked about this thing, right? You only talked about this person's genitalia with such this language and he used his own wife as a way of getting your ear prepared. I'm going to make a joke later about this very same thing, and I'm going to prepare you for that joke so that when it lands on you, it's not out of nowhere. Your ear has been pre-prepped, and you're going to get the type of laugh that I am attempting to get out of you with that craft.
So one thing I want to flag here.
Angel, can I cut in real quick?
Yeah.
Aaron, I know you have to go. I want to thank you so much for being here. Like, I have enjoyed your insight, and you have been an awesome addition to this conversation. So thank you so much. I hope that you enjoyed it as well. So we can say thank you to Aaron as he goes.
Yes. Thanks very much.
Always a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Peace, man.
Thank you.
So that's another interesting thing, right? Because we're here and we're parsing the nuance, and we're talking about the craft and how things work, and how there's all these multiple plates that are spinning at the same time and all this stuff. And I don't think that Dave was like, oh, let me put in a joke about my wife's pussy first, and then I'm going to do the beyond pussy joke, right? I don't think he did that. I think it's kind of like music, right? Where, musicians, they grew up, they didn't learn music. They can't read music. They just learned how to play their instruments, and they made a lot of noise in a room for a long, long time. And now they're just really, really good at it. And they just have an ear. They just know this sounds really good when I sing it on top of this. It just feels good. My instinct is taking me here, right? And then other people who do know music and who are super studied in this, and they go, you see how he changed the melody here? It's so important that he did that. It has this effect, and it creates this dynamic and all this stuff that was absolutely not in their mind, right? And I think Dave is at that point where he's so good at what he does. He has such good instincts. They're so finely calibrated that he probably did that without even thinking about it, right? But we can look back and go, wow, it's actually amazing that he preempted that very outrageous, crazy, absurd joke with a slightly tamer one that is more palatable, right? Because we've been there before. So I'm going to take you where we've been before, and then I'm going to push you a little bit. And I think that's really interesting. That's just an aside, but.
And I just want to say that we are.
I have two questions.
Go ahead, Sam. Hold on.
Then I'll jump off.
I wanted to say that we're at almost
two questions.
2 hours, 30 minutes. Go ahead, Sam.
My first question is, do comedians owe us political correctness? And my second question, set and not offend somebody.
Does comedians owe us political correctness? I'll just say.
What was the second question?
I'm
sorry.
I would say no to that. That would affect their ability to.
And the second one is.
I didn't hear it.
I didn't hear you.
You're on mute.
No. I was just repeating my first question. I was asking if comedians owe us political correctness. And then the second one was, is it possible to carry out a set without offending someone? Because, everybody speaks to a specific audience. So that specific set might not be for you, or that joke might not be for you. But I just wanted to hear your take on that.
Yeah.
I will make my answer very short and say no to both. I don't think a comedian owes us, in my opinion, owes us political correctness or anything, but we have a choice whether or not we support them and listen to them. And we draw the line on who we intake as people on our list of comedians that we like. That's all we can do. And I would say the same thing for anyone, writers, authors, public intellectuals. Like, I can't police their thoughts. I can't say you can only write about this stuff and I'll support you. If you write about this stuff that I don't like or offends only me, I'm not. No. I think across the board, people can have the poetic license to express themselves any way they want, and we have the freedom on whether or not we participate in what they give out to the world. So,
Yeah.
I would say about that statement, I would agree that I don't think that comedians need to be politically correct, but I would caveat that by saying that if a comedian is intending to be political, then they should be correct about what they're being political about. But I think that's different than being politically correct. So I think you can say offensive statements. I don't think I really don't think that anybody's saying that comedians have to offend nobody, right? I think that with comedy, you're going to offend somebody, but Dave in particular is trying to get a certain point across with his comedy, and it is a political point. And I just think that whatever point he is trying to get across, he should be right about the point he's making.
mm-hmm.
That's interesting. So like,
Sorry, Angel. Jay, did you ask a question yet? I'm sorry.
No.
Okay, thank you for standing by.
That's all right.
You can ask a question or give a comment if you need.
All right. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I'm got to say that.
Awesome.
Love
Thank
the panel. I had a two-part question. With all this, even having a conversation, does that mean Dave Chappelle won? Like, if we're having this conversation,
Yes.
didn't he get what he wanted?
I mean, go ahead, Angel, you were going to say something.
I mean, I'm not sure what he wanted, but I think this is good. So whether he wanted it or not, I think this is very good that we're doing this, that this is happening. However poorly it might be happening in one place or another, I think this is happening very well. I think this is going very wonderfully. Even though it's tense, but yeah, I don't know.
Well, that's what I mean. If people are having these discussions about his show, doesn't that kind of make him come out on top when he's trying to support his family, like everyone's trying to do, and now we're holding conversations over him?
I'd say so.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, Dave responded to a lot of the criticism that he's been receiving, and he just said, I think it was at a show, but he said, if this is what cancel culture is, I love it. Right? that was his response, and I was like, okay, well, I mean,
yeah.
I was just going to say that's the reason why I'm obviously, while I do have some critiques for Dave's special, I think it's extremely important that it's out and that it's not canceled and that Netflix doesn't get rid of it or anything like that. Like, it's so important for that conversation to be had because of the fact that there are so many people in the country that think exactly like Dave thinks, and that conversation can't be shoved under the rug and canceled. So,
and I just think I think, Jeremy, that's such a good point. And I think it's good for us to think about. Imagine if we didn't get to see this because, at some point someone effectively kept it from us. Look at the conversation that wouldn't have happened tonight.
Exactly.
And look at the conversations that wouldn't have happened, all over Twitter, all over, the dinner table in every house in the world, right? All of that wouldn't have happened. And I think we should think about that when we think about, restricting things. I think when we talk about, is this too dangerous to be let out? Is this too harmful to be let out? I'm a firm believer in, let us see it, let us hear it, let us talk about it. We can figure it out. I believe in us and our power to figure it out together. If we, put the swords down and turn the temperature down and just try to talk to each other like human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I have one more question if I can.
Okay, go ahead.
So with all the people that Dave Chappelle, I mean, he hasn't held back on anybody. Why is this not considered him including the trans community, and it's taken as transphobic?
Yeah.
Did that make sense?
That a little bit.
No, it makes sense. I mean, I don't know. I share that sentiment, and I've expressed this explicitly to my friends in that community that he is really saying you're not fragile, you're equal like anyone else I jab at, or anyone else that I punch the line at towards. That's what I think. So
and it would be a particular, I think it would be a worse form of transphobia, or not a worse form. It would actually be transphobia, in my opinion, and it would be a worse kind of oppression and discrimination and erasure if he was like, I'm not touching that because they can't handle it. You know, I just think that's I love that he doesn't believe that.
And how can you be part of? How can you be included in everything if people exclude you from so much? Like I would feel you would still feel really excluded if no one ever spoke of you or mentioned you in any conversation. It would leave a big emptiness, a big gap of feeling still discriminated against.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that one of the worst forms of violence is erasure. So erasing people's stories, keeping them from the spotlight, making them invisible. And so I think that Dave making those things visible, even the beyond pussy joke and like the beet juice, I think that was really powerful because one, like menstruation is just not talked about in society, period. And then let alone like what goes through a trans woman's body. And like what, like, does she have a menstrual cycle? What happens? Like, what are these things that actually go on? And I remember hearing a comedy set on the internet from a trans woman who was like going into and explaining her body and like doing it, and people were like, oh, I don't want to hear that, oh my god, like shut up, like ew, I don't want to know. And so for him to actually talk about it and be like, well, what is it? Ask yourself. He's actually getting you to think about things that for so long society has told us to just don't even question that, don't even think about that. So whether you think like, oh, it's a crash joke or not a crash joke, it's the fact that like, when has anyone challenged you into society to have empathy or to think about a trans woman's body and her menstrual cycle? Like when, you know, like that's patriarchy and all these things coming together to keep us from thinking about that. So I think like erasure is terrible. And so by him giving light to these people, you know, it's great.
So what was with Chappelle's last stand-up? What was the issue? Was it the amount that he went after that community? Is it because he didn't space it out and throw more jabs at the communities he usually does? Like what was why so much backlash? Is it because the amount?
I have to run, so I could give like my final thought, and I'll say this over and over again. To me, the backlash had much less to do about trans anything than it did about his staunch and deliberate and consistent attacks on whiteness and white supremacy. Anytime you have the gumption and the nerve to get up and publicly say, my problems with white people and all their bullshit, and I'm not going to stop until people actually see myself and see Black people, there will be backlash. And his comedy special, it was him like arguing with the whiteness, and whiteness was like, all right, well now treat me like this. That's how he sees the take. So if you want to say it's this banner of like, well, it's this issue, it's that issue, I think for me, my opinion is that the backlash stems and is rooted in his he did the thing. The emperor is naked in America and in the world. And that nakedness, that emperor is white supremacy. And so he was like, look, your genitals all out in the street, it's hanging out. And that always makes the world mad. So that's my take. And it's been great. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Lindsay. You're awesome. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Lunsford.
Bye.
Bye.
I would speak to that and just say that I think that honestly, a lot of people's critiques, there's a lot of them, by the way. There's many ways to approach that comedy special, but to be honest, I think there is a lot of lack of nuance with a lot of the critiques, and I think that it really comes down to what you believe the definition of transphobia is. Honestly, do you think it's transphobic to not believe that a trans woman is a woman? Do you think that it's transphobic to not believe that a trans man is a man? If you think that it is, then you're going to say that everything that he said in that thing was transphobic, right? But if you believe that you could still not believe in those things, and as long as you treat trans people okay, then there's nothing wrong with a lot of the things that he said in there. So I think that was a big thing, is that people have that understanding of what it means to be transphobic, and it really depends on what understanding you have of that.
So Jeremy, are you saying it was the shock factor of it, not necessarily the amount that he did? It was the shock factor that he went in on them so hard.
I think it's a combination of
things.
Yeah, I think it's a lot. I think it is a combination of both. I think that this is a special that like for example, in the Sticks and Stones special that he did talk about trans people. He did talk about LGBTQ issues, but the whole special wasn't about that, right? This special was very much heavily about trans people specifically, and their relation to the Black community. So,
and I do think that part of it is intentional. I saw this special as a kind of third act, right? It's it's called the closer for a reason, right? It's not just because he's going to stop making those jokes, right? Like, this is the end of a kind of, it's not just because it's the last special of the 5 special deal. It's not just because he's going to stop making those jokes. It's because this is his final comment, and it's contextualized within the other 4, right? He talked about a lot of the same things, but he's going to land on this thing because the controversy kind of spiked up. But I think another reason why this is so valuable is because this is indicative of the larger issue that we have with talking about anything in 2021, right? It's like Brittany, I know you're from the South, right?
No, I'm from the Midwest, my dude.
Midwest, sorry. So from the Midwest, I'm really bad at geography, so yeah, forgive me. But yeah, so you're from the Midwest. I'm from New York, right? We may never have met if it weren't for the internet, right? I've made this point before, but we may never have known that the other existed before this magical thing, right? And so you have a life, and you have a context, and you have a way of speaking and a way of seeing the world, and I have my own. And now we are thrown together and communicating over these devices and over these social media, and those contexts collide. And sometimes they collide in really bad ways, right? We miscommunicate, we misunderstand, right? And it kind of like the way that, the word cunt means something very different here than it does in England, right? And so if I never met an Englishman before, and I meet him at a bar or something, and he calls me a silly cunt, that's going to be a moment of culture shock. That's going to be a moment of culture clash, of context clash, right? And we can understand that because we know the difference, and we can see it from the outside. But that's happening to us in a million directions at the same time, all the time, when we go on social media and we say anything, right? We're all kind of assuming everyone means the same thing by this word. Everyone knows I'm joking when I say this. Everyone picks up my sarcasm here, right? So I think the reaction to this special is kind of a microcosm of the problem that we're all just having here, which is we need to take a step back and recognize one another's different contexts. Oh, where is he coming from? What does he mean when he says this? I can't just assume he has my definition, right? It depends, right? Like some words, and everybody knows what and is, and that's uncontroversial, right? But racism, transphobia, right? Even oppression, right? All these words that are very loaded and important that we understand when we communicate, they have different definitions. They have different valences. They have different weights for people. So we have to stop, and we have to do the extra work of, understanding where the other person's coming from before we can have any kind of successful communication. I call social media, the boss level of discourse. Like you have to have collected all the items. You got to get your, all your hearts. You got to have the 36 hearts if you even have a chance of making it. because this is the boss. This is the hardest level of this. We can do it, but we have to know what we're doing. We have to get good at it. So,
Angel, a lot of what you're talking about is actually in John McWhirter's book, 9 Nasty Words, and his explanation of it, of how people, maybe of certain cultures would call each other certain things and why. But what you explained was actually a very good explanation of his book. So I like that.
Well, now I don't have to read it.
Right?
I'm a big fan of John's. I love John.
You just rewrote it.
Yeah. Well, no, John is far, light years away from me in terms of that. But yeah, I'm a big fan. But yeah, it's, this is what I think the larger conversation is, and I think it's important that we pinpoint that.
Like, plays into the qualifications conversation I was trying to have with Aaron. And when Brittany asked him about what jokes he found funny and which ones he didn't, he couldn't really say. And I think that's why it was so important for me to try and figure out what his qualifications were, and that's kind of what I was getting at.
I mean, I think he did. I think the problem is that his are going to be different than mine. They're going to be different than Brittany's. They're going to be different than Kyle's. And so, not that Aaron is doing this, but this is why I think it's wrong to put that on Dave Chappelle. I go, hey, you fucked up here. These are the jokes you messed up on. These are the jokes you shouldn't have said, right? And Aaron's not doing that, but people are doing that. And I think that's the problem. It's like, how could Dave Chappelle possibly navigate that minefield, right? It's impossible. There's no way. He's not going to get to the other side while absolutely trying to please everybody. It's not possible.
Well, yeah. I mean, he answered me, but Brittany had she had put it into better terms than I did, and he struggled a little bit with her question.
I think he answered it. I just disagreed maybe with, or I didn't see his position maybe with the examples. But I think he answered it.
I think he answered it, but it's a matter of where the line is, and the line is there for him, but it's not there for me.
There's somebody who would share that line, and we'd be like, oh yeah, that made complete sense to me. Yeah, that's it. I gotta head out.
I mean, even
thank you, Kyle.
Yeah. Oh, great talking to you. Yeah, even between me and my wife, we're sitting like 2 feet away from each other on the same couch, watching the same screen, watching the same special at the same time. We're not laughing at the same time. We're married and we're not laughing at the same time or at the same jokes, It's okay.
That's what makes it interesting. Be completely unfair to try and cancel Dave Chappelle or any comedian over their joke.
I mean,
I don't think
Dave Chappelle's uncancelable.
Yeah, he can't be canceled.
Yeah, you can't cancel Dave Chappelle. It's impossible.
He canceled himself already 5 times. Like, he don't.
That's true.
He himself.
Like, he really.
But I do think it's important that Dave is doing what he's doing and can't be canceled, because there are open micers who maybe they have a great joke and they're like, fuck that, I'm not going to do it, because they can, right? We can never hear about them ever. Not even never hear about them again. We'll never hear about them to begin with, because they just can't do that. So it's important for these lines to be crossed by people with sufficient armor to cross them.
I agree with that.
And I think Jay's question, I would say that maybe we're just experiencing some growing pains right now, where a lot of conversation is around trans people, whereas before it was like hush hush. So now they're being so included, it might really just be uncomfortable, because they don't really know where everyone's coming from, and this is it's kind of a new thing, in my opinion.
But therein lies what I was asking. Do we owe Dave Chappelle a debt of gratitude for opening up this conversation for us all to have?
I think that's the point of his comedy. I mean, I think on David Letterman, when he was on there, I think this was on Netflix too, and I'm paraphrasing this, but he more or less said, like, my comedy and my jokes is meant for you to think, but what you think is up to you. It's not my responsibility. I'm just doing the jokes and you guys have the conversations. That's why he says, I don't care. Not to say I don't care, but what you're doing, these conversations, yes, I want them to happen. But if you don't like me for it, you have every right not to like me for it. But at least you're talking. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to think about something. So, yeah. But guys, almost 3 hours.
Yeah.
This has been an awesome conversation. And I just want to end it with this. Does anyone have like a 20-second, 30-second thing they want to say about the conversation, about what they hope people take away from this, Dave, whatever? The floor is yours.
I do. I'll be quick. And I hate that the people that were on aren't on, but I wanted to say that he was talking about earlier that seemed like Dave Chappelle was trying to hold something back or wasn't fully giving everything he could. And I feel like if this was his friend, someone that he talked to a lot, he may be trying to hold back private conversations that we don't know about. We can't assume anything. He may just be trying to be respectful. And the other part would be when she was speaking on how Dave can't take off his black. He's always going to be black, and white people can take it on and off. And I think with when it comes to white people in the greater LGBT community, that they get to move in power in one position of being white, I guess is what she was trying to say, and then they get to bring that power over to the other community, and they get to move fluidly back and forth like that, which is why I would think would make their movement stronger, because it's almost like twofold. And that's all.
Okay. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would say that first of all, I'm really grateful for the conversation. Thank you, Brittany, for even having me and being able to talk about these issues. I mean, I mentioned from the very start that I do have my own critiques of Chappelle's work in the past and even this special that he did here. I did still thoroughly enjoy it because I believe that you can approach these things in a nuanced perspective, and it doesn't have to be, I completely hate this special or I absolutely love it and everybody can go F themselves. Like, I think you can have a nuanced perspective where you're like, okay, I recognize that this is a work of genius, and I'm so glad that he brought this conversation to the table, while also I have some critiques of it as well, you know? And so I can also say, lastly, too, with I do follow a lot of Angel's work as well when it comes to star manning, and I really appreciate that the article that you wrote on that really sort of changed the way that I approach issues like this, because it's really about just giving an actual charitable approach to what people are actually trying to say, and not just what they're trying to say, but like who they are as a person as well. Like, you know, we want to give the best version, not just of their argument, but also of themselves, you know, and I really try to do that in every conversation, even if I have critiques of the person. So
Angel Starmans. He Starmans everyone. Yes.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's really wonderful to hear. I mean, I guess it would be best to end with, you know, what Daphne Dorman said. I don't need you to understand me. I just need you to see that I'm having a human experience. And that's what we're having. That's what's happening because of Dave's special. That's what's happening. That's what we're doing here, and that is good. That is an inherent good, no matter how bad the conversation is or how difficult it is. And, you know, Press Play mentioned like it's growing pains. I think it is growing pains. Growing is good.
Yeah.
So let it hurt. I'm okay with that.
So if I could say one thing, I've dreamed about this, being on this part for a long time. I think we all need to give Brittany tons of credit for making these conversations happen, because they don't happen. And but for real, Brittany, you bring them to light. You bring great panels. I love everyone's feedback, and they answer quickly with their beliefs and opinions. They're not looking things up. They're bringing their opinions to the table, and they're having a conversation. And to me, that is what this world needs. And hopefully you continue it and it grows grows from here. So I just thank you guys for doing what you do, and I'll continue to listen and watch for you guys all the time.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And I just want to say to the
I want to say
panel-
one.
Oh,
sorry, I just want to say one more thing. I think special shout out to Aaron, because I think for most of it, at least for most of what I was here to see, he was alone in defending his point of view, and a lot of people were pushing back on him, and he handled it really well. And I really respect his ability to do that and his willingness to jump into these things and to not necessarily be in the majority. And to have to very carefully navigate that stuff. So
and that wasn't on purpose, I swear. But
I've seen Aaron and Sam that you've had on, Brittany. I've seen them in different debates, and they always stand firm.
Yeah, Sam. Yeah, you're right. They do.
You know who I'm talking
and
about.
They can stand
I forget
alone.
his last name.
And they can stand alone too.
And they're fine doing it.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Well, on that note, all I want to say is I want to say thank you to the panel. Thank you for you guys coming up. And yes, these conversations I am passionate about platforming, and I know they're not happening. And sometimes I'm like, do I got to do this conversation? But the fact that this was so polarizing, I'm like, this would be a missed opportunity not to do it. So I'm just thankful that people are willing to actually dialogue and be honest and really raw and candid about what they think. Like, that is what I'm appreciative of. And I appreciate everyone. So thank you so much. And everyone that tuned in for 3 hours, you guys are the MVPs. You guys are the GOATs for real.
Yeah.
This will be posted later tonight. If you missed it, if you missed some of it, the whole thing will be up. I want to thank Jeremy, Angel, Jay, Press Play with the Simpsons profile. I also want to thank Aaron, Dr. Lindsey Lunsford, and Abby. I want to thank all of them for coming on. So tune in next time. There's more to come. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.